Yeah, man. I can't believe I can't believe I got to be here for this. And then, sitting there in the room with like 25 people in the media all day. I would say I was live tweeting it now, and then we have the final link from Joffy, which is really really amazing. So I was gonna do like a summary or whatever, but I don't even know where to start, man. I mean, there's so much that happened today. Um, I'm gonna try to add a few people as speaker here, and we'll just kind of dive into it here. Assume we're gonna have a pretty big chat, so just kind of
Yeah,
get situated here.
this is wild. It's awesome that Undead that you're at the trial, you're in the media room. It's super cool. I think we're all really excited. I mean, we're very excited to hear your firsthand experience and everything you saw and heard there. And then the meat of this stuff is just crazy. So there's so much to talk about.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I'll hit a couple of broad points here, but then obviously I want to hear everybody's thoughts and everybody's reaction. So, obviously I was there today. They opened up the trial before the jury got in there. They were talking about this motion, and they weren't real specific on who it related to. I believe it did relate to Agent Heidi, um, which kind of developed through the day. So then at lunch they kind of discussed the motion too. And then even after the jury left for the day, they were discussing this kind of this vague reference to emotion related to impeachment of a witness on you know who is apparently the subject of an investigation. So as the day developed, I thought that was Gaynor, um, but now I'm not so sure. I think maybe it is Heidi. That's actually the subject of that, which makes more sense, I think, with the timeline. Um, but yeah, so that was pretty interesting. Then we got into Priestap, who just didn't remember anything. I mean, it was ridiculous, and a lot of people in the media room were just laughing at him because it was totally ridiculous. Like the first question is just foundation, standard stuff, like, "Hey, what was your last job title?" And he didn't remember. Like he struggled with that, and he had to be helped out with what his job title was. So that was like a rough start. Um, he did not seem like he was prepped at all. And then, as you get into this testimony, the Durham team's trying to hit these home runs, and they're asking him like, hey, is it important for the FBI and you and your role with the FBI to know if the information has a political connection, right? Is it from a political campaign? Is that important to know? And then they asked, if this information is from CHS, who's going doing an end around his handler, provide the information. Is that important to know? And then they asked about somebody that has business contracts with the FBI, and Rodney Joffe apparently has a lot of business contracts with the FBI. And to all those points, they asked, is that important to know? And then Priestap, like, just ridiculously was up there, like, well, I struggle with the word important. It was certainly relevant to know, and like that's kind of the whole testimony of Priestap in a nutshell. It was totally ridiculous. And then I mean, the real fireworks happened as we got into Gaynor and Sands. And Gaynor was incredibly articulate. I thought he was an extremely strong witness for the prosecution. He spoke really, really well. He was really confident in answers. And then, as we saw, the defense, I mean, the cross examination was just incredibly long. And as he got into it, it's like, okay, are they reaching? And then they started scoring some points. And, you know, Gaynor apparently had 5 meetings with the government in prep for this trial. And the first meeting is the one that really had the issue. So that was back in October 2020. And at that time, apparently he didn't do like any prep work. Like he hadn't looked at any notes. And basically all his answers were wrong, which is a big problem. And then like his second meeting was in December 2020. And the real problem was by that point, he did have an opportunity to review his notes. He did have notes in his possession, but he still gave wrong answers. And that became a real big problem because his answer for why he remembered stuff later was, oh, well, I referenced my notes. And I think that was a big point that the defense made was like, wait a minute, you had these notes when you gave the wrong answers. And he did not have an explanation for that at all. So the defense, I'm going to call it like I see it. They scored some points with him. It doesn't seem like they moved the ball forward on the central issue in the case, whether or not Sussman lied or whether it was really material. That it didn't really go into material, and I think King had some great remarks on that in DMs that we had. And can't wait to hear King talk about that. But real briefly, I'll say, Sands was kind of the same way. I thought she was a pretty good witness for the prosecution. And then as you got into it, it's like, wait a minute, she's a brand new agent for the FBI. Like, she was only with the FBI as a special agent for like 3 months. And then they have her like headlining this investigation. And like, she's the one that's briefing the headquarters once or twice a day on the status of things, which is pretty crazy. And then they're having her. I thought she did pretty well, but the cross examination again was really, really long, and they were trying to trip her up. And I think she did a good job of staying ahead of them. I don't think there's quite as much material, but they did get her. They did hurt Durham a little bit, I think, in that. The other point that they're making, which I think does go into materiality a little bit, is basically the government or the FBI went and did all these investigative steps after they knew there was major issues with this data. Like, they knew there was issues with the data by October 5th and October 6th. They had strong indications it was debunked, but then they went and did extra investigative steps. So part of the challenge for Durham is going to be to flay that out and say, okay, well, this is an action that was caused that would not have otherwise been taken. And that's, kind of the hang up of Durham's entire prosecution strategy so far, I think, is that they've got this big narrative out there, and they went so fast today. I'm somebody, I consider myself really well versed in this stuff, and I have to tell you, I was really, really struggling to follow all these exhibits and all these emails and like follow exactly what it was saying. And it's a false statement case, and I'm just sitting there thinking, you gotta simplify this. Like, this is crazy. I was kind of disappointed with that lack of strategy. I mean, they're making it much more complicated, and that's providing these opportunities for the defense to like draw out the cross-examination incredibly long. And I think there's a risk that the jury's going to be like, well, wait a minute, I don't understand what's going on. This is too much, and I'm just going to say there's reasonable doubt and acquit. So, I mean, those are kind of some high-level takeaways. I obviously live tweeted everything. I also have like 8 pages of notes that I managed to take. So I'm sure I have some more thoughts here, but I'll open this up. I see we have a full chat tonight. Ship, King, Mansoor, and MB. If you guys have any thoughts you want to share, go ahead and kick things off. I'll add a couple more speakers too.
Can you speak to the opening of the Chicago investigation? 2 things: the CHS, was it Jaffe? And secondly, what was it? Whether or not basically like headquarters was, obfuscating the source that they were wanting to interview. Did you get clarity on that? Because I was reading all the stuff today and I can't remember.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good question. So Rodney Jaffe is the CHS. That was made clear later in the day. And for a long time there today, I was sitting there thinking, like, wait a minute, who is the CHS? But yes, that was made clear in later questioning. Hopefully the jury picked up on that. I'm not quite sure they did. But yeah, to your second point, I think it was Allison Sands that was up there as they were talking about. What was your second question again? Go ahead and repeat that. I want to make sure I got it right.
Well, I guess just like how that was originated, like who was pushing it,
okay.
And how did Chicago get it?
Yep.
And like if headquarters was, what they said, keeping it close, Matt, what's his name almost got threatened with prosecution for just breathing the fact that it was Democrat related. What did we get a better sense of what was going on there?
Man, it was crazy. So Gaynor was up there for a long time, and they're really hammering him on this closely held thing, which apparently is not typically documented. In this case, it wasn't. So the defense alleged, and the prosecution did nothing to refute, that this was a closely held investigation, which implies that Gaynor was supposed to withhold information from the field agents, or they weren't. And that's what Gaynor was kind of fleshing out was, well, it was closely held, so I wasn't allowed to tell these field agents. And he said that he was talking to Maffa, Struck, and he thought it came from Baker, ultimately, this directive of it being closely held. But Allison Sands is the one that actually opened up the investigation, the EC, and testimony that came out around that was that she was directed to open it by Curtis Hyde, I believe, and they introduced a email from Pientka, I think it was Pientka, to Hyde, where they were saying something to the effect of, that's where actually the seventh floor came into play. So that was the big, like one of the big moments of today was the seventh floor, including the director, is really fired up about this alpha stuff. But in that, in that string of text messages, like a couple more later, it went on to say that something to the effect of pre-stat didn't want to pursue it, didn't think it was right to go forward on it. And then they said they basically did like an end around to Dan, which I can't pronounce his last name. So that's kind of how it opened up, at least. Yeah, Ship or King, I don't know if you guys have thoughts to add Hans and
I could,
Walk of Fire.
with what I've read today, and just sort of some of the conclusions that I've drawn, along the way over many months or even years, especially, when I was doing some work in the lead up to Carter Page's complaint, which I worked on that. Bill Priestap, to me, is a guy who had reached the end of his career. He had reached the last rung in the Bureau leadership that he was going to get to, whether that's by virtue of simply he was approaching mandatory retirement age, or, with Comey and McCabe now in the top two slots, he wasn't, he wasn't, didn't have the dragnet in front of him to pull him along further. I don't get the feeling that he was a McCabe guy. That Andy McCabe was his rabbi, so to speak, as they say, and would have advanced him, further. I don't know how many slots there were above where he was at that he could have gone. But in listening, and this goes back to not just this episode and his testimony today, and what he said about Alpha, but also the sort of his involvement in trying to undo the General Flynn prosecution, where his notes reflected what's our end game here, or what are we after here, getting him fired or 1,001 count. It really strikes me as that Priestap was just warming the seat, looking forward for. He was R.I.P., retired in place, and by the same token, he's in a position that has dozens and dozens of highly consequential investigations that all come up to him on the counterintelligence side. And what I heard from him, the thing that most resonated with me today, and the testimony related to him, was when he said, "I don't remember it. My only recollection is it didn't amount to anything." So it's like this is one of dozens of things that the assistant director for counterterrorism is like. This was a nothing. This was a dry hole. I moved on. I had dozens of other things that I was responsible for oversight on that were meaningful, and this was not. I don't remember it because I didn't have any reason to remember it. And that to me is completely authentic, especially for a guy, it's at the end of a 25, 30-year career with the Bureau, and, is really thinking about, where I'm going to go in the corporate world to make, $275,000 a year as a director of security for some Fortune 500 company. Because that's what they're all thinking about at his level in the last 2 years is, where am I going to go interview for my second career in corporate America? So it didn't strike me at all unusual for Priestap to be up there and say, "I just don't remember," mainly because this investigation went nowhere. And in the time frame that he was involved, September, October 2016, there were lots of other things going on. that were more meaningful to him captured his attention on a daily basis, and became more hardwired into his brain than this issue. So, but I'll hang on here for a little while tonight. I mean, there's 20 other things I could talk about based on what I've read today, and my reactions to stuff, as well as a big win for me today in a January 6th case. But we can talk about that another time.
Congrats. I like it. I do want to put you on the spot here in a second, which I love to do. But yeah, I mean, you raise a good point about pre-stamp. I mean, that's something I overheard in the media room today. It was just how laughable it sort of is that this guy's notes were so central to the Flynn case kind of being, and Flynn being exonerated, if you will. And then obviously they're highly consequential here with Sussman, where he explicitly says that Sussman didn't have a client or whatever. And then on both counts, like he seems to have witness amnesia. I mean, he gets up there and he just doesn't remember anything, which, maybe that's legitimate. It is a long time ago. So
yeah, but the point is that in that week of whatever that day of the meeting, like I think they met the day after Sussman came in to meet with Baker. He met with Baker, and in that week he might have had 25 meetings that were consequential on real things.
Yeah, and they did make
and he took notes on all of them, and the notes get filed away that he never even looks at again.
Yeah, and I think they did make a good point, at least early in the day, with the various witnesses of the data being, incomplete and false. I think that was pretty good for the prosecution today. But what I wanted to put you on the spot was really before the proceedings got underway today, the judge was making inquiries as it relates to Lichtblau's motion. And Lichtblau wants to really limit the government's ability to cross-examine him. And I think we kind of talked about this yesterday, but what the judge actually said and posed at one point was, DOJ policy right now is not to fight against reporters' privilege if they want to bring them into a trial. So if the government wanted to subpoena them and have them up there on direct, they wouldn't really fight against a reporter who wanted to assert privilege over certain information. So in that vein, the judge posed the question of, what limitations should there be on cross-examination for Lichtblau? And he seems really receptive to limiting the government, which is pretty amazing. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Now, I did read some of that, and I did listen to the Gouveia and got sort of I don't think that's where Cooper was going. I think where Cooper was going is saying, look, I think most of this stuff is largely tangential and maybe irrelevant. I don't really want to confront the privilege issues. I'm more interested in narrowing down the scope of both direct and cross on the basis of relevance. Like, what among the things that Lichtblau might say have to do with Sussman? And what is just stuff you'd like to ask him? Because it might produce interesting answers, but not necessarily relevant to Sussman. And so that's where and Judge Cooper said, I want to avoid the privilege issue altogether. Well, the way you avoid the privilege issue is you don't say you have a privilege. You just say that I find that 90% of what you guys want to ask him about is irrelevant in this case. And I'm going to tell you under Rule 403, you don't get to ask those questions because I don't think the answers assist the jury in deciding whether Mr. Sussman lied or not, because that's all we're here for.
Well, I think like one of the points that was made later on was David Dagan was sort of like the person interfacing with all the media entities, and at one point at least was going to interface with the FBI. So apparently, the Lichtblau did speak to David Dagan. Now that is a little bit ancillary to the false statement as it's charged, and given the limitations on the joint venture conspiracy theory that Durham wanted to present. I mean, it still ultimately goes to the witness's credibility, doesn't it?
Yes, but what can Lichtblau testify about what Dagan said? It's all hearsay.
But Dagan's immunized. I mean, couldn't Dagan come in?
It doesn't matter. If you want to call Dagan's witness, call Dagan as witness.
Okay.
But how? Why should Lichtblau testify about what Dagan told him? Whatever Dagan told him is hearsay. And if it's okay, so if not for the truth of the matter asserted, then why is it relevant? How how is what Dagan said to Lichtblau relevant to Sussman's lie?
Okay,
That's
a good
part of
point.
the, that's part of the issue here. The difference between kind of trial evidence, like not everything that might make the story more complete or more interesting comes in, because unless you're going to call 100 people, Lichtblau could testify about the questions he asked and why he asked them and what he said to Dagan, but Dagan's answers are hearsay.
Usually none of this stuff is getting in.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I think those are good points, and the judge did leave it open, but it will be interesting, I think, to see what happens with Lichtblau and what type of limitations there might be on the cross-examination.
Or
Certainly,
on the direct.
I mean,
what he's going to do is he's going to limit the direct. And
well,
then he's going to say, okay, the cross can cover the direct, but the direct is going to be very narrow. The direct is going to be interaction between Lichtblau and Sussman.
Well, see, and like he asked the defense what they were going to ask on direct, and the direct was laying out like a lot of questions. They covered a lot of ground in what they represented. They were going to ask Lichtblau. I have it in my notes here somewhere, but like my impression was, okay, well, if they're asking him all that, then Durham's pretty much got to have like free latitude to ask him, all the different connected pieces to it, because they really did have like an expansive list of a field that they were going to ask Lichtblau. So I don't know. I mean, we'll see what develops out of that. But if you have any other thoughts on anything else today, I'd be interested to hear from you or anybody else that wants to.
Yeah. Just to kind of to finish that point, this is always sort of the role of the judge, and federal judges are much more aggressive than, in my experience, where I've seen of state court judges, like the Rittenhouse case. Federal judges are much more aggressive in narrowing the case. Like, and I've heard judges say to me, look, why do we have this jury here for 3 weeks for a trial that should take 3 days? You've called them away from their lives to sit in this courtroom and listen to you guys ramble on and drone on about stuff that's not relevant. Why should I not have foremost in my interest their time? And that kind of goes to the question. You got a 1-count false statement about whether this guy said or did not say he was representing our client, and it's going to take 3 weeks. The meeting between Sussman and Baker took what, a half an hour? The trial over what was said is going to take 3 weeks.
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, they have 2 weeks blocked off for this trial. They're not going to be done. I mean, There's just no way. They're going so slow through these prosecution witnesses. I don't even know who's scheduled for tomorrow. Probably Trisha Anderson and I forgot whoever we didn't get to today. Probably Anderson.
That goes to another point I wanted to make, and I'll turn this over to somebody else in just a second.
Sure.
Allison Sands, was that the name of the young female FBI
yes.
agent? Okay. And how did she, just physically, how did she come off to you?
Pretty good.
Is she bigger, smaller, younger,
a little bit younger? Yeah, she's a little bit younger. Obviously, she was only a special agent for like 3 months when they had her tasked to. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
The FBI had her briefing the headquarters on the status of the investigation once or twice daily, and she's opening the EC. She's making all these decisions. It's crazy.
Curtis Wield, I think, was her training agent, she said. So
yep.
She was a new agent out of the academy, is assigned a training agent generally for a year. Training agent, supervises and looks over their shoulder on everything they do, and essentially the training agent can use the new agent as their flunky to do all the ECs, to do all the paperwork. Okay, so the fact that she opened the EC didn't say anything that Heel didn't want it to say. She just typed it. Now, when and I'm not quite sure how it ended up in Chicago, other than keep in mind that Crossfire Hurricane was being run out of headquarters when headquarters doesn't run investigations. Okay, investigations are done in the field offices. And this was being done out of headquarters as kind of a special, closely held thing that Peter Strzok was watching over, right? Now, Gaynor is a unit chief in headquarters. they don't run investigations either. But didn't Gaynor testify that he volunteered to Joe Pietka to try to run this thing down and to find out what was all about? And
Yes, he
later
did.
he said he regretted. Okay, he's a unit chief. Units support field offices. They don't do independent investigations themselves. People rotate in and out of units on a weekly basis. It's kind of like a stopping point as people are trying to gain subject matter expertise. They'll leave a field office, as an agent will leave a field office, go to a unit which has a narrow focus in order to gain some expertise on that subject matter, whether it's cyber, Russia, China. There's all kinds of units at headquarters. Okay, so Gaynor's not even a squad supervisor. Squads run investigations. Gaynor's not even a squad supervisor, but he runs this thing down through Chicago. I don't think it ever came out exactly why this ended up in Chicago, and when it ended up in Chicago, why it ended up on the desk of an agent with 3 months experience, other than I think she's probably got a technical background, which I think is supported by the fact that after 3 years, she quit the Bureau and now works for Roku, right?
Yeah, I think I saw somebody post out there. She worked for Cyberpoint, I think is the name.
I think that was probably before coming to the FBI.
That's right.
For 3 years at Cyberpoint. She doesn't work for the FBI anymore, though. I think she quit. She works for Roku now.
I believe that's right.
Okay, so she's probably got a tech background, and after 3 years realized carrying around a gun and arresting people and kicking in doors isn't really a career path that she thought it would be. So she left. All right. So, but her technical background, her technical expertise is probably why it landed with her. But that sort of tells you that whoever shipped it off to Chicago out of headquarters, since headquarters doesn't typically do investigations, was looking for somebody with a little expertise, but they didn't really care if they had any experience. That's the level of importance that was assigned to this almost immediately. Because who was it that, or maybe it was the FBI or maybe the CIA that said by like 4 o'clock on the first day they didn't think that there was anything to this.
Yeah, that's Hellman.
Yeah. So
yep.
So the initial analysis by cyber, I think, in DC was that there's nothing to this. It doesn't. The data doesn't back up the hypothesis. But they still sent it out to Chicago, where they opened an investigation with an EC and pursued it. Which maybe that's because the people on the 7th floor were jumping up and down. Why were the people on the 7th floor jumping up and down in the middle of September? Because for 4 weeks they'd been chasing Crossfire Hurricane and hadn't come up with anything.
Yeah, I mean, as it relates to why it was open in Chicago, I'm a little bit unsure about this, but I do think I have a note somewhere here. My understanding is that Rodney Joffe provided information to Agent Grasso, who forwarded it to somebody in Chicago. Now, we don't have the exact date on when Joffe gave the information to the FBI, but it was prior to September 21st. Sussman went to Baker on September 19th, I believe, but no later than September 21st, Joffe had provided information. Now, it's entirely possible that Joffe actually gave the information to Grasso before Sussman had that meeting with Baker. And with that information, I believe, coming to Chicago, as we kind of got from Allison Sands in the EC, when she wrote it up as the Department of Justice had received information from Rodney Joffe. That is what she basically wrote up in the EC. And then later on, I mean, she forwarded this. We have all the people CC'd on this. It's Struck, it's Maffa, with all this incorrect information. So the premise of the investigation on the EC is wrong. And I don't know when it was corrected to, it was Sussman that brought the information because you had both going on at the same time. And Allison was really confused about that.
Yeah, and that points up a point that I've made over and over again, that you just certainly can never dismiss incompetence as an explanation for stuff that just gets screwed up. And she's only incompetent, and she's only got 3 months experience at the time. And apparently Hale didn't look at it closely enough. I said nothing would have been there that he didn't want there, but apparently he didn't look at it closely enough, or the agent herself wasn't exacting enough to make sure that all the information in her EC was accurate, double check the source material for all of those entries before hitting enter.
Wow.
This happens all the time.
I will push back a little bit because I'll tell you what. I mean, I think as a corner, we've kind of collectively been moving away from the idea that, anybody at the FBI or State Department or Obama administration will see any criminal charges. But after today, I was sitting there and it just was over and over. It was like the seventh floor, directed this. The seventh floor was really excited about the alpha allegations. The seventh floor directed this and that. And like I just had like a really bad sense of something more than an incompetence coming down from the seventh floor. I think there is some level of malfeasance there, and that's what we've been waiting on for 6 years. And is Durham actually going to do something about it or not?
Well, and I think it's fair enough to say the seventh floor wanted this to be true. Andy McCabe and Jim Comey were convinced. They wanted this to be true. Peter Strzok wanted it to be true. Look at their communications, text messages in the summer and fall, and all the exercise, the efforts they went through to get the cut corners and to accelerate the pace. What I think people lose track of is that the Bureau in that time frame was watching the calendar. The clock was ticking on the wall. You had a compromised Republican candidate for president who was a Russian, he was the Manchurian candidate or the Moscovian candidate, and the election was in 8 weeks. And so if this Russia stuff was true, they had to run it to ground quickly and get it out into the public so that this, Russian influence candidate, might be forced to withdraw. I think that was the goal.
Well, they also have briefings from Brennan that like there's a Hillary plan afoot to provide this express type of evidence to FBI. So they should at least have that on their radar at the same time. And we don't see any trace of it yet.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, one other piece that cast a really bad shadow over the FBI leadership was on cross-examination. I think it was Allison Sands, where she's up there and she's trying to answer these questions, and it's like, okay, well, you opened a full investigation, but then you didn't go interview anybody, right? Basically, you did preliminary steps. You didn't obtain warrants, you didn't interview anybody. And then they kind of drilled down into that in a way that I thought was pretty effective for the defense. I don't know if it changed anything, but it did play pretty well in the courtroom, I think, in that, David Dagan, his name was provided by Rodney Joffe through Tom Grasso. And basically they were saying like, hey, go talk to David Dagan. He'll give you all the information. Like he's the one that wrote the white paper. They had that. And for whatever reason, they were unwilling to go interview David Dagan. And Allison Sands was communicating with Tom Grasso at one point and setting up like the conditions for the interview. And then she testified, and she wasn't completely sure, but she said, I believe somebody told me not to go interview him, which is amazing. And that smacks of interference by the top levels of the FBI leadership. And she even testified, she said, that was the most logical investigative steps to do by that time. And we didn't do it. But instead, they went and they subpoenaed a massive number of records from like Listrak and Central Dynamics and GoDaddy, hundreds of thousands of documents, and they tried to recreate this. And that did not support the allegations. And then still, they didn't go interview David Dagan, and they had his name. And they had the names of Matt Blaze, Steve Belvin, Susan Landau. Two of them were later named in the public reporting, the news reports, as independent researchers. And as it turns out, they are not independent at all. They were involved from the start. You don't provide those names to the FBI and then let them be blindsided, and you don't just throw them out there randomly. I mean, they were clearly involved with these allegations and constructing these white papers, or they saw them well in advance of the allegations going to the FBI. And Susan Landau is somebody I've personally been keying in on for a long time because she has a close relationship with John Blank on, chief of staff for President Obama. She co-wrote a paper about encryption with him just last, a couple years ago. And, I have these FOIAs to Obama, and there are communications with Susan Landau during the time in question. So, we'll see what develops there. I find it really, really odd and really intriguing to see Susan Landau involved in this capacity. And, there hasn't been much scrutiny because she hasn't been named previously, but people probably should take a look at her a little bit.
I have a question.
Sure.
Shouldn't there be a 302 between Jaffe delivering that information to Grasso? Because if he fingered David Dagan as writing the white paper, okay, depending on how that was phrased, Jaffe invented the white paper. I mean, it was his idea. He brought the people together, brought the data together. If he said, no, David Dagan's this guy, you need to talk to him, I think he wrote it, or, something along those lines that was misleading or, potentially a lie, that'd be really interesting. There should be a 302 that Grasso wrote up, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. There should be a 302. And, Grasso's a name that him and I were checking out a few weeks ago. I mean, he's got some interesting connections. We were doing some research even before we knew that he was the handler for Jaffe. So, I don't want to impugn his character or anything, but, he's got to he's got to get put before the grand jury. He's got some questions to answer about what he knew. And specifically, I mean, there's some sort of representation where apparently Jaffe asked Grasso to keep his name out of the allegations. So there is a report of these allegations coming into the FBI anonymously, which makes no sense because he is a confidential human source. And I think it was maybe Gaynor that was up there and he said, no, like that, that's why it's relevant. Why would a confidential human source do an end around his own handler to bring allegations to the FBI through Sussman? And as it turns out, I mean, they're trying to create multiple information flows to create the illusion of corroboration as they did throughout Russiagate. But yeah, I mean, I don't, it's not a good look. And, I'll leave it at that, I guess.
You put your finger on where I started this morning. I thought hearing that testimony about or your report about Jaffe being a confidential human source, CHS, providing information through Grasso on the white paper at virtually the same time that Sussman was going to Baker with the same story and the same documents, the same data, but not telling Baker it came from Jaffe. So you've got two different avenues to get the same information to the FBI at the same time, simultaneously, theoretically or on the surface, from two independent sources, which is designed, obviously, to trigger an investigation. That's the kind of thing that could easily promote a conspiracy charge against Jaffe and others for doing that. It's not brought here, and I'm not sure why, because it's clear the mechanism they used to hide Jaffe as a CHS, but allow him to feed the Chicago group the same information that the people in D.C. were looking at independently. It's designed to manipulate the FBI. So I said, yeah, voila, here's a conspiracy case, at least involving Jaffe, that Durham may be looking at, hopefully.
Hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the other really amazing things, and I'll give it right back to you. I mean, there's actually a point it wasn't emphasized real well, but at some point during the course of their investigation into these allegations, apparently they went to Grasso trying to get the interview with Dagan, but they also were trying to get more information about this CHS, which is Joffe. And Grasso said, or I think there was something to the veracity of the claims, like not panning out. And Grasso apparently volunteered that he had a subject matter expert on the allegations, and apparently that's Joffe too. So it's like, I don't know if it was distinct from his role as a confidential human source, or it was like ancillary or whatever. But it seemed like it was a distinct conversation where, in one point he said, well, he's a confidential human source. And then in another conversation, like he said, well, wait a minute, I have a subject matter expert who can explain all this to you. And it's the same guy. So it's really, really bizarre what Grasso was doing.
Well, regardless of what he was doing, it's clear where the defense is heading. They have taken the offense. They have put the FBI on trial in their cross-examination of every FBI witness. And anybody listening may remember my theme in a couple of these chats, that you have to start with the jury, the makeup of the jury and their biases and prejudices and predispositions. And you're looking at a 90% Democrat jury pool. And it appears that, you've got people on the jury who donated to the Clinton campaign, etc. So they are sympathetic to the Clinton campaign cause originally. And you may remember a piece of the testimony that the defense got out of Robbie Mook on Friday. Mook reminded the jury that the two worst things that happened to Hillary Clinton during the campaign were James Comey. First, in conducting his way off the rails press conference, where he said she's not going to be prosecuted, but she was probably very, very negligent in the way she handled classified materials and her private email. And the second was to, after having closed that investigation, then a week or two before the election, reopened it publicly to go look at Anthony Weiner's laptop to see if that contained evidence of the crime of mishandling classified information coming from Hillary. So Mook reminded the jury, who I'm sure didn't need much reminding, that Comey did what he could to torpedo Clinton's campaign, maybe not on purpose, but through incompetence or hubris. But whatever reason, he was the culprit. That was what they took home from his testimony over the weekend. And today, we get the FBI on trial for the way they handled what every witness has testified, has said, were these concerning, potentially national security issue related possible connection between a Russian bank and Trump that need to be looked at. They could be a national security threat. We could have a traitor running for president and about to be elected that has to be looked at. It's a matter of urgency, high priority. And what did they hear the FBI do with that? You just went over it. They sent it to Chicago and gave it to the youngest, newest agent in the Chicago office. They took it away from the cyber group in D.C. that had looked at it for an hour or so and concluded it didn't amount to anything. And so Comey and his minions sent it off to Chicago, talked to the woman like twice a day, but they never interviewed anybody. They never interviewed Dagan, who had produced some of this material, or most of it. They got totally confused about sources. That is, they kept the existence of Sussman and his sources secret from the investigators. They kept the existence of Jaffe as a confidential human source secret from everybody else except his handler. And they did that. It was almost they made it appear to be intentionally designed to bury it until after the election. Then they challenged every witness on their memory and their notes, that they have convenient memories and they don't take notes, or when they take notes, they're not accurate. And that's why they went on and on and on, Ryan, for hours cross-examining the witnesses to show the jury that these guys are either covering something up, they don't want the jury to know, or they're incompetent, one or the other. But the theme is going to be when in the closing arguments will be that the FBI buried it on purpose. They didn't investigate the serious allegations, and they have covered everything up, including what Sussman said or didn't say.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. And I mean, as it relates to the FBI, I mean, they're certainly being painted as this bad guy. And I sort of have a thought that's kind of ancillary to the trial, but one of the things that I took away from today is the scale of this operation. And of course, we knew it's huge, and we know it's connected to Fusion GPS and the Clinton campaign, obviously. But this specific set of allegations, I mean, we're still learning new information. And the other point that I think I made today was we just found out that Rodney Joffe submitted this information himself to his handler. So that's something that was completely unreported until recently. And they were trying to, fit this information into the FBI however they could. Now, by October 5th or 6th, they had David Dagan's name, and they had a strong suspicion that tea leaves and her posts were connected to what David Dagan and this confidential human source were doing. And the real takeaway that I have is, why didn't they ever go back and fix this? Like, why didn't they ever, we know Joffe and Sussman continue to try to feed this information to the FBI, to Congress as well, to the CIA. And then months go by, and there's got to be any number of inquiries that have been done, most chiefly IG Inspector Horowitz, and we learn none of this. I mean, the scale of the cover-up has got to be massive, because there are a few confidential human sources that are alluded to very distantly in a couple documents that we've seen, but nobody's connected the dots that should have been extraordinarily easy to connect to say, okay, well, it was Rodney Joffe all along. Like, it's not that hard. Like, we're not, there are a few geniuses in this chat, I know, but like, you got to be able to say anybody could have looked at this information and connected the dots. And then, Mueller, when he first took over, he would have reviewed everything that was collaborated up to that point. We obviously saw the briefing to the DOJ in March 2017 before Mueller, where they were reviewing the Alpha information. Where did all this information go? I mean, they're briefing it to the DOJ in March like it nothing's happened. Like, they haven't debunked this. Like, they haven't connected the dots between David Dagan and April Lorenzen and Rodney Joffe. And they absolutely connected the dots by then. I do not buy that they are that incompetent. They are supposed to be the premier law enforcement agency in the world. And you can't connect the dots between these information streams that are extraordinarily similar. I don't buy it. And then Mueller, he's going to do a review when he takes over of all the information that's been collected. And, where's the person that is going to hold all these people accountable? I mean, yeah, thankfully John Durham's here, and hopefully he does something. But all this was hidden. It was hidden from HPSCI. It was hidden from, everything. And it's like, not to be philosophical or get on a soapbox, but like, this is bad. Like, this is not right. And it shouldn't take a special counsel to go in there and get this information and figure it out, to connect these dots that are so brazenly connectable. I mean, this is not hidden at all. Yeah, I'll leave it there. But Hans or Fool, I don't know if you guys want to jump in with your takeaways from today.
Sure. No, you're absolutely right. None of this was hidden whatsoever at all. Steve and I did an article for the Federalist just last week, and we pointed out that when the FBI briefed the DOJ on March 6th, 2017, they lied their asses off because they knew all of this shit was just bullshit. They knew that Danchenko, the whole Steele dossier, everything was bullshit because 2 months earlier, in January of 2017, Danchenko was interviewed and he said it was all bullshit. Well, now today we learned that in January as well, the whole Alpha thing was shut down because it was all bullshit. So instead of going in there and telling their DOJ supervisors that it's all bullshit, they went in there. Andy McCabe went in there and said, oh, this is all extremely serious. I mean, he was still, people really need to take this in. This makes me so angry.
Hey, Hans, let me jump in real quick and just mention to you in the timeline.
Sure.
They shut down Alpha Bank 6 days before Peter Strzok went to interview General Flynn. This is how desperate they are to make something work.
Yeah, no, really good point. It makes me so angry to look back at that March 6th meeting. So for listeners who are kind of new to this, the FBI had this sensitive investigation because it involved a presidential candidate and a president who became a president. So there were special reporting requirements, and they were that required the DOJ to be in the loop at all times, and they had these milestone meetings where the FBI had to tell the DOJ exactly what was going on. Now, through this Durham prosecution of Sussman, we found out about the March 6th meeting and the meeting notes. And all the higher-ups of the FBI, including Priestap, McCabe, Strzok, went over to the DOJ, and the DOJ was represented by the acting Attorney General, Dana Boente, or Buente, or however you pronounce that, because poor Jeff Sessions, or I say poor, I should say hopeless Jeff Sessions, recused 2 days earlier. Anyway, they went over there and briefed them, and they just lied their asses off. And, as Ship just pointed out, the Alpha thing had been shut down. But they're at the meeting talking up the Alpha thing 2 months later. I mean, it's incredible. The Danchenko interview had basically shut down Steele because Danchenko said it was just all gossip. He didn't confirm anything. I mean, apart from the million thing, which is a total lie, which he's now in trouble for himself. And what did they do? They went in there and talked up the whole Steele thing. Why aren't any of these people on the dock right now? Why haven't they been indicted? The March 6th meeting, you have Strzok lying his ass off. You have McCabe lying his ass off. You have Priestap lying his ass off. But instead, this guy Priestap is in court this morning for Durham. I mean, that's what's so frustrating, that Durham has sort of turned it around where the FBI is the victim. Now, I guess we can all understand that from a strategic point of view because, well, it's a DC jury, so you have to kind of play it nice and well, the poor, what did they say on the first day? Our FBI, our FBI was duped. No, they weren't duped. I agree with Ship. Totally agree with Ship with what he said earlier. You had people who had like 2-3 months experience brought in just to deal with this. Absolutely ridiculous. You had Priestap, who's an absolute idiot. As Ryan said, he didn't even remember his job title. I mean, I think all of us on Twitter in our corner, we've known for years that the guy is a total idiot. So you had all these idiots, but then you had a bunch of people who weren't idiots, like McCabe and Comey, who were running this thing. And they pulled off this scheme. They went in on March 6th, 2017. They lied their asses off to their supervisors at the DOJ, and yet none of them are in trouble. And worse still, they are the ones on the witness stand for Durham. I mean, it's so incredibly frustrating. And, to be honest, I don't really care anymore whether Sussman, is acquitted or hung jury. I don't really care about any of those things. The great thing about what happened today is that it was Sussman's team who exposed FBI corruption today. They brought out probably the most important thing in the past 5 years, that what Ryan mentioned earlier, that the seventh floor was very excited about this alpha stuff. I mean, that's just totally corrupt. If an agent is guided by what the seventh floor wants, that's just complete corruption. You got to shut the place down. And that's what was testified today. So, that is worth more than anything that happens in the case, win or lose or whatever. Today was a complete and total indictment of the FBI. And, I'm very happy it happened.
Yeah, I kind of will reiterate what I said earlier. I never in my thinking get too far away from the August, September, and early October timeframe. The people in the top 5 or 6 slots at the FBI exposed themselves in their own communications between each other as being, anti-Trump partisans. Either they were Democrats or they were part of the Republican establishment that Trump first, leveled before he went after the Democrats. I've said this before. Before Trump ran against Hillary Clinton, he took out 17 GOP establishment candidates for president by mocking and ridiculing them and simply just laying waste to the Bush/McCain power structure of the GOP establishment. He was no more. I mean, they didn't want him, and I would put Jim Comey in that category. They didn't want him to win any more than the Democrats wanted him to win. So you have the power structure both at the top of the FBI and the DOJ on both sides of the election, dominated by people that we'll just call them anti-Trump. Not that they were, anti-GOP, they were anti-Trump. And they were desperate beginning in early August to find the pony in the pile of horse shit that was Crossfire Hurricane. And Alpha was just, another aspect of the same search. Looking, they know Trump is compromised. They just have to keep digging until they find the evidence. That's why, they're excited by the Alpha Bank Trump connection, because it is a maybe an evidentiary basis that they can use to prove the existence of the connection that they're chasing. And at that point, they think it's true. I mean, these computer scientist researchers have fed this information to Baker, and they're at least initially banking on the computer scientist researchers being, accurate, and not taking into consideration the source of the information in terms of having some skepticism.
Ship, I think somebody must have been skeptical of it, because they essentially buried that investigation, sending it off to Chicago the way they did, to the youngest, newest least experienced agent they could find. Why would you do that to something that's critical?
I mean, I think it's worth pointing out, and Ship, I'll pass to you, but I mean, it does remind me of a couple really strong points that the government had today. I mean, they didn't just bury it in Chicago. They did implement some basic procedures pretty quickly. I mean, they really seemed to jump right on this. They got the allegations there in September, and by October 5th, they'd started getting some information back. They got the logs from Central Dynamics, which didn't support the existence of this covert communications channel. They contacted Listrak, and they got some information on the configuration of the server. The server was configured for outbound only, and that's really important because all these lookups are actually incoming lookups. These are incoming lookups from Spectrum Health and Alpha Bank, and the server is not configured to even receive them. So there can't be veracity to the information because the server would just reject them, which is exactly what happened apparently. And I mean, they had a whole litany. They had 5 or 6 points where everything came back like, no, this is completely garbage. Like they contracted Mandiant, and the defense tried to tie that to Alpha Bank. I don't know. They might have scored a little bit of a point there, but Mandiant is a globally recognized IT firm, well respected, who debunked it entirely. They sent up to Central Dynamics, got the logs. That was completely debunked. Obviously, they had some internal analysis done by people like Hellman, who analyzed it, completely debunked it. I mean, nobody was supporting this data, and they knew by October 5th, October 6th, it was garbage, and certainly by mid-October, they knew for sure. I mean, there was just nothing to it. I don't even know how they kept the investigation open until January.
That's
Okay, here,
my point. That's my point. They kept it open till January, even
right,
though
okay.
they had totally debunked it by mid-October.
Yeah, okay. Let me just see if I can't, connect the dots a little bit here with a little bit of speculation. Because I didn't, until this conversation, some of the facts have come out in this spaces, I didn't have all of these details in my head. But let's look at what went to what Jaffe sent to Grasso and what Sussman gave to Baker are largely the same thing, but two independent paths. I think, as King was mentioning earlier, two veins into the bloodstream to get this information. The bloodstream being the FBI. What Baker took from Sussman, he gave to Strzok, and I think Strzok sent that to Cyber at headquarters, and the Cyber guys within a few hours said, "This is bullshit. The data doesn't support the hypothesis." And but I thought one of the funniest things, and I think this was in the testimony last week, one of the funniest conclusions drawn was simply like, look, the Russians are sophisticated. If they wanted to have a back channel communication to Trump, they wouldn't do it this way. They'd do it in a way that would be hard for us to find. This would be too easy to find. So we immediately dismiss this as being, a Russian intelligence operation because it just, they're better than this.
Yeah, and all
okay.
covert communications channels they always say trumpemail.com. Like that's a hallmark of a covert communications channel.
Yeah. So it was rejected by Cyber at headquarters. The same information gets injected to Grasso, and I don't know where Grasso is. Is Grasso in Chicago? Do we know?
Grasso was out of Pittsburgh, but my understanding is he forwarded the information that he got to Chicago, and that was the nexus that prompted the opening of the investigation in Chicago, is my understanding.
So within the Bureau tracking system, and this is information we don't have yet, in the Bureau tracking system, somebody saw the connection between the information that Baker had taken in from Sussman and the information that Grasso had taken in from Jaffe, and saw, oh, look, this looks like the same stuff. So it simply became so Chicago, unlike Cyber, who said, this is bullshit, we're not doing anything with this, Chicago opened it. They opened a full investigation just based on the face value of the information, and then they did what they would and this is counterintelligence now. This is CI, so it's not Cyber. In Chicago, it's a different division of the Bureau. Cyber tends to operate on the criminal side. CI operates on the intelligence side, so they're on different sides of the wall. So this is a CI squad, counterintelligence squad, and they take it in as counterintelligence, nation threat, data, akin to Crossfire Hurricane, and they're just going to run with it. And they do all the things that they would typically normally do, all the stuff that cyber could have done, but cyber just pulled the plug early, recognizing that it was BS. But the young agent, being told that the seventh floor is, really excited about this. The young agent and her supervisor, her training agent and her supervisor, they run it out. And it ends up, they run it out for 3.5, 4 months, and they close it out in January. Now, sometimes the closeout, that can, a case file, an investigation can sit dormant for several weeks or a couple of months, but the agents get up. They're prompted every 90 days by a computer system to update a case file, and if nothing has happened in the 90-day period and there's no justification for keeping it open, that leads to the communication from their supervisor: close out the following. Either close it out or make some notation in the file justification for keeping it open. So when it gets closed in January, that just might have been the end of the 90-day period. Agents do this all the time. Their 90-day periods come up and they sit and they write, they write closing ECs for a day and close out 20 files. It just happens. So the timing of the closing is not necessarily magic. That's just the day the agent had to do it before the end of their 90-day period.
Except the timing of the closing was 3 days before Trump was sworn in as president. And it coincides with headquarters keeping the Flynn investigation open a long time past its end date.
There's no question. There's all kinds of suspicious activities in that December, January timeframe leading up. But this is all CYA stuff at that point. Just like that March 6th meeting was CYA. It's like now Trump officials are running the Justice Department, and the FBI is going to have to account for what they've done over the last 10 months. A meeting in a room they never expected to find themselves in because Hillary was supposed to win, or they were supposed to actually be able to prove that Trump was a Russian agent. One of those two things was supposed to happen, and oh, by the way, neither of them happened. And so now they're in a meeting they never expected to have to own up to what they've been doing. And remember, it's 3 weeks after that meeting, right? Or 2.5 weeks after that meeting, Jim Comey stands up before the House committee and raises his hand and says, the FBI is conducting a counterintelligence criminal investigation, of the Trump campaign. And then begins upon his efforts to, he's documenting his communications with Trump. He's still believing it all. He's drank the Kool-Aid by that point. And he's still believing it all. And he's working on his process that if Trump fires him, that there's going to be a special counsel appointed. And that's exactly what happened.
So who at headquarters walled off any communication between Jaffe and the people in Chicago running this investigation, and between Dagan and the people in Chicago?
I'm not sure by what you mean by walled it off. Cyber just dropped it. Cyber and headquarters, they just dropped it. They didn't pursue it.
No. The woman who testified today, the person in charge of the investigation in Chicago, said she was not allowed to talk to either Dagan and never talk to Jaffe.
Yeah, I think that kind of maybe goes to this question of whether it was ordered to be closely held, and at that time, because I remember Gaynor testifying about, well, closely held would mean only Sussman or Jaffe's ID would be protected, but not necessarily the computer scientists, because they weren't the source. So the source, who would not be disclosed to the working agents, so that's what it means when it's closely held. The agents aren't told the identity of the confidential human source who provided the information, so they would not have been told it was Jaffe. But okay, well, what about other people that prepared the data, the computer scientists? And I think Dagan testified that, well, they would not have been subject to the closely held because they weren't confidential human sources. But I think the issue is my guess, and again, it's just kind of trying to fill in the gaps here, would have been that the fear would have been that if she went to interview Dagan, that interview would have disclosed Joffe's ID. Because Dagan would have said, "Oh, we did all this shit for Joffe, and we gave the information to him."
What determines closely held?
That's a determination made sort of up the chain of command as to, well, typically a CHS information is not given, identity is not given so Joffe has a handler, Grasso. Joffe might give information that produces investigations in a half dozen places all over the country. Well, Grasso's not going to go do all those investigations. The information is going to get shipped to wherever it needs to go. And the agents in those locations that get that lead, they call it an investigatory lead, the agents that get the lead aren't going to be told who the CHS is, because that compromises, the confidential nature. Unless the investigation is hindered by the closely held status. In other words, we really can't chase this out until we know who the CHS is, because, say they need to interview the CHS. And so I think Graydon or Gaydon, I'll keep getting the name wrong. I think one of the questions he answered was he determined that the closely held status was not hindering the investigation in Chicago. In other words, the Chicago people said, no, we don't need to know who the CHS is to do our work.
Well, all of that bureaucratic
Yep.
sidestepping and backtracking, has created a mess for Mr. Durham, because it came out clear today that the defense is going to argue that this investigation got short shrift by the FBI.
Look.
And they did not do a thorough job, and they buried it, and now they're covering it up, and they're trying to blame Sussman.
That's how you beat the government trial. I mean, that's how you beat the government trial. You don't prove your client is factually innocent. You prove that the government's investigation is so flawed or amateurish or incompetent that the jury shouldn't have any confidence in the theory the prosecution is trying to press upon them.
One clarification is that Grasso did work out of the Chicago regional computer crime area.
That's probably it. That's probably it. There's some regional component for certain types of crimes where multiple field offices share, responsibilities. But I don't know the details of those.
And then you also have the Mueller 302 dump that showed on October 4th of 2016. Some female walked into the Chicago office and gave a bunch of information about the purported connections there. I suspect that was probably Gene Camp, based upon the proximity and some other factors there. But Allison Sands, you got to assume, was probably in that meeting there as well.
That's pretty interesting. I don't think that came out in trial today. I think we have the allegations from Joffe being given to Grasso. We have Sussman giving it to Baker. And then that would be another avenue that they tried to feed the information into the FBI. So that, if that's true, that's pretty interesting. I'll have to pull up that memo.
Yeah, I tweeted out the 302 there, and so it's unclear for sure, but Gene fits in the spaces. April also fits in the spaces, but it was definitely a female. A week and a half after it was bubbling up in DC, it was bubbling up in Chicago. So they got played clearly.
We were trying to figure out why, if it was Camp, which we don't know, but it does seem to fit, why she would have gone to Chicago. If she's in Indianapolis or at University of Indiana. And if she went because Grasso was there and she went to Grasso because Joffe was being handled by Grasso, that would make sense.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's good conjecture. I think that's probably right, but we'll have to have to get more information. Obviously, I just wanted to point out for everybody, I just shared a tweet to this chat, and apparently, I mean, Rodney Joffe wrote a letter to AG Garland 3 months ago asking him to fire John Durham. I mean, that's the kind of guy that we're talking about here. So
yeah, I saw that too. That's awesome.
Yeah.
With respect to this issue about the second source there in Chicago, this is Leslie. Hellman testified last week that, about this stuff. And then Berkowitz, the defense lawyer, examined him, asking him if he knew that the Chicago team had received this second stream of information from a female. And he implied that that was the reason that the Chicago counterintelligence folks opened a full investigation after Hellman and Batty had declined to open any investigation.
I don't think the timing works out, at least if that 302 is accurate on 4 October, the EC for opening it was a week and a half prior.
I mean, theoretically, they could have written the 302 later. I mean, we saw that with Flynn's case where they wrote the 302 like 2 weeks after the interview. I'm not saying that's the case, but
it references the date of the interview. Yeah, it should say the date of her interview. But it's interesting. Berkowitz is trying to put that in front of the jury, though, right? Like he implied that these DC guys kind of faffed it off and they didn't have all the information the Chicago people did, and that's why they opened a full investigation.
I mean, that's really incredible to have yet another information flow that they're trying to get this information into the FBI, to have another member of this, I'll call it a conspiracy, trying to feed information to the FBI. That's pretty amazing.
Well, Phil Bunch at the Post says that, that's not what happened. That what happened is, everyone was all over this Russia thing anyway. It's not like Hillary's team really ginned it up. I mean, those fuckers are just incredible.
I have to agree. I mean, there's so many ties and there's so many questions that are so easily asked by that time. I mean, you have like Report 112, which they say they got from David Korn a little bit later, but I mean, even the white paper, the overview, white paper of Alpha Bank that they got. I mean, that has strong vibes of the Steele dossier, and there had to be a couple of people that connected the dots. Like, hey, we're getting all these reports. They seem really similar in their context and their style. Maybe we should ask the question, like, is this all politically connected? Or, I don't know. I'm just
Did you guys
rambling.
see anything today that explained why the EC says the referral was from DOJ?
Yeah. So Allison Sands was up there, and it's a mistake, but her understanding at the time was basically that it was Rodney Joffe's information that flowed to the Department of Justice on a referral, and then the Department of Justice gave that information to the FBI. So that's what she wrote on the EC.
I know, but who'd she get that from? Because that's the part that's not coming clear. Who told her that?
That was Hyde that told her.
Heidi told her that? Okay,
yeah,
well, who
Heidi.
told him? Right. Because, this is what I want to know, is which one of these idiots decided that that's how they were going to handle this? It has to be Baker or Strzok or Price Step, right?
Yeah, and I think they did ask that question today of who told Heidi, and I think she answered something to the effect of the FBI leadership told them that.
Right, leadership. Yep. Okay. Well, that's only about 5 or 6 people. I mean, it's astonishing to me. Bill, what do you think of that? That EC has an inaccurate piece of information in it as to the commencement of the investigation. It's outrageous.
Here's my supposition on that. As I've said before, James Baker was a DOJ guy. He's not an FBI guy. He came over after a career at DOJ. And within the Bureau, you oftentimes will have the agent class refer to 7th floor people from DOJ as DOJ people.
Yeah.
They never accept them as part of the Bureau.
As part of the Bureau, that's true.
There are just DOJ implants in the executive suite.
I wondered if they met Sussman, but you're right. They could have met Baker.
I could easily see somebody saying, "Oh, it came from James Baker, the DOJ guy who's now general counsel," and
Right.
then somebody
That's
just
what goes in the EC. Right.
exactly. That's what when I read it, that was my first reaction. And the thing and the thing to also remember about ECs, and we heard a lot about the EC and Crossfire Hurricane. Not a lot of effort gets put into writing an EC because they have no consequence. The
Right.
only thing the EC does is it gives legal authorization to the agents to begin to exercise their law enforcement authorities. And it says that, like Peter Strzok had to get the EC written before he could fly to London so that he could get paid for flying to London.
Right. Yeah. So all the paperwork makes sense. Right. This is something I was telling people when back in the Flynn days is that this kind of stuff almost never gets into your criminal case. Right. I've never had a case where the EC came into evidence. Right. That just doesn't happen. It doesn't matter for 99.9% of the time. So, but it's just astonishing to me that that's actually a piece of false information in the EC. Oh my God.
And they don't even really ever refer to it as the EC.
Right.
They refer to it as the opening.
Right. That's what the agents call it.
It's the opening communication. It's the OC. Right. It's the one that opens the case and gets them their authority to proceed and to begin to conduct their investigative exercise under the DIOG. So the kind of the public sort of outsider's fascination with what's in an EC and when it was written and what was said, it's like nobody pays attention to those details.
Yeah, right.
Leslie, what do you think about the idea that this young new staffer in Chicago is writing the EC and taking charge of the investigation? Now, mind you, this is an investigation of a presidential candidate,
right.
A little bit more than a month before the election. And that's something all of them have sworn to Congress was the highest sensitivity, something closely held on the 7th floor at headquarters. Only a small handful of people knew about it. I'm talking about Crossfire Hurricane.
Right.
Well, now you've got
quarterly briefed either.
Yeah, now you've got this potential nuclear bomb off in the hands of a wet behind the ears, brand new novice agent in Chicago.
Right. They're trying to make that work by not telling her or Hellman either who it was, what it was really about. Right. Like they're trying to have it both ways. They want to keep the close hold on what's actually going on, but yet, get what I guess they're thinking is more objective analysis if the people actually doing the forensic work don't know what's going on. It's bizarre, I think. I mean, this isn't like actual forensic work, right? Where if you say certain things to the examiner, you're maybe making suggestions that invade the objectivity of the work, right? This is the kind of analysis where who the source is makes a difference. She testified to that today. So I'm astonished to hear people saying, oh, well, we didn't want them to know because it didn't matter. Well, she got up there on the witness stand today and said that the motivation of the source would, of course, made a difference. I mean, it just astonishes me, the whole thing.
It sounds like I took it as. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I took it as evidence that they didn't want it known. They suspected something was funny, but they didn't want it out. So
well, it's twofold, I think. Right. Yeah, they don't want to spread around. And also, I think they don't trust their own people, right? And they saw what happened with the Hillary email thing and Comey's press conference and all of that, right? So they don't want to, again, I think Baker is telling the truth about this. They don't want to be seen as trying to influence the political process, but then you end up doing it anyway because you're trying so hard not to. It's perverse.
I think there's a good possibility they were looking for the answer that they wanted. And if Cyber didn't tell them the right answer, then they said, okay, we'll send it out to, I got there's a tech savvy somebody in Chicago that let's run it by them and see if they give us what we want to hear.
Well, from what Hellman testified, and I went to the court that day and saw him testify in person. He seemed to be truthfully saying that was the plan the whole time, is that they wanted both divisions to look at it because it involved allegedly foreign influence. So they wanted counterintelligence to look at it. But since it involved the kind of data that it was, they also wanted cyber, which is on the criminal side, to look at it. So I think that was the plan all along.
It's a good conversation there. I didn't want to interrupt. JH, I see you have your hand up. I don't know if you have wherever you want. Go ahead.
It was about Sands. It's like you have this new. I wasn't aware that she was a new agent on the job until here the spaces. But a new agent 3 months into the job, it's easy to confuse a new agent like that. It's easy to mislead a new agent like that. It's probably easy to manipulate a new agent like that. And if somehow it was sort of planted, that she should say that this, information came from the DOJ, and she wrote out the EC without even thinking about it. The interesting thing is, the thing that makes me suspicious about all that is that, I've heard that this EC was then widely circulated, and many, many people on the 7th floor and around the DOJ saw this EC, yet no one spoke up and said, hey, no, this didn't come from the DOJ. We all know this came from Michael Sussman. Or it's like it's another one of those tools that was implemented so everybody could pretend that they didn't know what was going on. And even though they all knew it was there, nobody said anything about it. And it's kind of interesting to me that if Durham loses this case, it's going to be because, like Ship said, that Sussman's team is able to basically indict the FBI in all of this. And I almost get the feeling like the FBI is so good at lying and making up stories to cover itself that, that Sussman's been fed a line of BS. He knows it's BS, or not Sussman. I'm sorry. Durham's been fed a line of BS and knows it's BS, but at the same time, it's been a consistent line of BS, and he has to accept it to prosecute his case. And I'm just wondering, if he loses this case because Sussman points out all this stuff that doesn't work out, does Durham turn around and start doing process crimes against FBI agents that fed him a line of BS? It's sort of, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties in with what Gaynor was kind of being impeached for by the defense on cross-examination. I mean, he was really impressive in direct testimony, but then, he was getting lit up about his recollections, and they were asking him, he was essentially like the gatekeeper, and he was like withholding information from field agents because he said this was closely held. And then the defense just dropped this bomb just out of nowhere, right in the middle of their cross-examination, where it was like, well, your status in the investigation changed from witness to a subject as the result of your October 2020 interview with John Durham, didn't it? And he's like, yeah, it did. And it was like, wait a minute, what?
Right. They did that to Hellman too. They dropped shit on him in cross-examination that the government should have covered in their direct.
Exactly. That's the point I wanted to make. Yeah.
They're not litigating this case very well. Now, I'm a defense lawyer and I look at the world that way. But honestly, they're not doing a good job with these witnesses. They're underprepared. I don't know how that can be.
Yeah, I mean, that's
especially with like 4 prosecutors in a 1-count case.
Right. Although,
I mean, I tried a case all by myself that took 3 months.
Yeah, seriously. Right. I know. It looks to me like some of these people refused to prep with them, like Price stepped in. Yeah, I don't think he agreed to prep with them. And I know that DeJong guy didn't. God, he was scary, you guys. He was like Nazi concentration camp guy, right? Like, I'm just following orders. I just do what I'm told. Okay. Even though it makes no sense and is contrary to the interests of your customers, well, he's the boss. Okay, then. I mean, whoa.
Let me mention this, the idea, we have references to the 7th floor, and I'm just, this is like off the top of my head, but when that reference is used, understand, you're talking about like 6 or 7 people
Right.
and their staffs. I'm not talking about, a crowd of 100 on the 7th floor. You're talking about the director, the deputy director, the general counsel, the
Two
chief of
division
staff,
heads. Yep.
the assistant directors over counterintelligence and criminal.
Right.
So it's not a big crowd that is the reference to the 7th floor. And so just sort of, and it's all the usual suspects. It's all the people that we've heard about for so long. It would not include somebody like Strzok. He would have been on the 6th floor. I mean, I don't know if he was actually on the 6th floor or not, but the 7th floor is the leadership of the FBI, and there's a limited number of people in that location.
So he stands. I think they stand a good chance of losing this. I don't like the way it's going. Now Baker, I guess, did okay, right? Better than I thought he was going to. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah. See, I think the problem is they're trying their narrative instead of trying their case. It's like I don't know if you were on earlier when I said, why is it going to take 3 weeks to try a case that's about a conversation a meeting that took 30 minutes? Well, it's a meeting that took 30 minutes.
I know. I know. It's insane. This should be a 3 or 4 day trial tops. It's insane that it's 2 weeks or 3. It's crazy.
But they're trying a narrative, and which makes me wonder what their real motive is here. Do they really care if they convict Sussman or not, or are they more interested in getting all of this information out in the public record because of the impact it might have on others?
Maybe, because honest to goodness, I do not understand why they didn't take the sting out of a number of these witnesses. It's like they didn't think through what the cross-examination was going to be. And even small points look really bad when the defense lawyer brings them up for the first time, right, in the middle of the guy's cross-examination. The juries, they get more reaction. That sticks with them, the reaction of what a bombshell it was going off in the courtroom, than they do with even what the information was. So I've been astonished. Little things, like their first witness was their expert. And Bill, did you see this? She didn't even say what field they were offering him as an expert in. The judge had to ask her.
Yeah. I would have just started with, I think I said this in a little speech. It's like, I'd have started with, what's Crossfire Hurricane? Why was the FBI interested in Russia in the summer of 2016? An agent. Why did this Alpha Bank material, why was it important when it came in?
Right, exactly.
Well, it was important.
They didn't start with any background, no context, nothing. They put this expert up who bored the shit out of people, right, for an hour about DNS stuff. And the jury needs to know that, but not your first witness. Good God.
Right.
I mean, I just don't understand.
I don't know. It's a famous movie scene somewhere. Like, you want to say, has anybody played this game before?
Right, exactly. Seriously. Right. You guys, my husband is an old prosecutor himself, and he's listening to me tell him about what's going on, right? And he's like, it's like they don't have any trial lawyers trying this case. Right.
That's my impression. This is foreign to anybody who's trying to
stand up there. Right. I know. It's bizarre.
Yeah, but you remember the Kleinsmith issue, right? Kleinsmith was a complete disaster, and a few of us flagged it up, and everyone else was saying, "Oh, this is 4D chess or 48D chess or whatever," and Durham is finding out more stuff behind the scenes, whatever. And a few of us were saying, "No, this is bullshit." He charged the guy with just some absolute minor kind of, traffic ticket offense. And he left out the big offense, right? The Russian-based. Kleinsmith put in the fucking FISA that Danchenko was Russian-based. That's the key. That's everything. If he had put in, no, actually, he wasn't Russian-based. He was a Brookings Institution guy in D.C.
Right.
The judge would have said, if the judge had read it, or the judge's clerks or whatever, yeah, really? That was the key.
What you got here?
That was the key. And it was not in there. And, a bunch of us flagged it up. Like, why the hell isn't that in there? And then I got pushback. Oh, Durham is playing 48D chess or whatever. No, he just fucked it up. And, frankly, I think
either that
the same thing's happening again.
They couldn't get Kleinsmith's lawyers, who actually, you know, I've dealt with them, obviously, through Carter's case. Kleinsmith had good lawyers. And, you know, maybe they wouldn't agree that was a false statement, and Durham didn't want to spend a lot of resources proving that. I don't know. I'm just guessing there. But what I will say is, having dealt with Durham's lawyers in the sentencing phase of Kleinsmith's case, they knew what they were doing. They were two experienced guys. One was from the U.S. Attorney's Office here, and the other one was from Connecticut, right? Their pleadings were good. Their arguments were good. I didn't agree with all of their positions, especially on whether Carter was a victim, but they were appropriately lawyering the case. I, therefore, am astonished at sort of the low level of quality of trial skills of this team.
Well, I'm astonished that, having had such a low view of the Kleinsmith issue, we've gone way below there. You know?
Right. I know. But it's just like basic stuff. You're just like, there's no old hand on the team telling them somebody who's tried, somebody like Bill, right? Or somebody like my husband, my husband tried over 100 jury trials. 20 of them were murders he prosecuted, right? Like, they needed somebody like that on their team to be like, no, knuckleheads, your order of call does not start with your expert.
I mean, I would add to this, even sitting in there today, when they had really strong arguments to make, they went way too fast. And, I am much more versed in this than any juror that's out there. And I was really, really struggling to keep up with what they were saying. And every time I was like, oh, that's a really good point, they flew into the next point. Like, there's no emphasis and no follow-up.
It's not in the right place. And then they're belaboring details that you don't give a crap about and confusing the shit out of people.
Absolutely.
Right? I know. That's how Monday was, or Tuesday was last week, too. It was just unbelievable. So.
I really think they need a strong witness that they're going to end on, like a witness that's basically going to let them.
Who's that going to be now? They should have started with Bias and ended with Baker, but that's not what we're doing, right?
I feel like they never put the screws to any of their witnesses.
Exactly, they didn't.
And that's the problem. They just accepted anything that these witnesses presented as the truth.
Right. I agree. Especially for people that didn't prep with you, which some of them that was obvious. They should have really just gone after them and hammered them with documents. Right? The document says what it says. You can say whatever you want on the fucking witness stand, but the document says, on this day, you said X, Y, Z, right? So, but they didn't do that. They did not go after those folks. So I'm perplexed. I will just say I'm perplexed at this performance.
So am I, completely perplexed. On the other hand, on the Danchenko side of things, they do have their ducks in a row. They have him dead to rights, and I guess there's a few things I can't say here, but it just seems very different. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I mean, I'm just wondering, why on earth is it so incompetent here and it seems so competent on the other side? Is there some scheme? I don't know.
Let me suggest what I think it might be. Both Kleinsmith and Sussman, they were trapped into venue in the district. The offense conduct happened in the district.
Yeah,
they couldn't file it anywhere else.
Right.
They were going to get a DC jury,
right,
and they were going to have a DC judge.
Right.
And they did not go there with Danchenko. They took that over in the Eastern District of Virginia when they could. So the DC trials are sort of throwaways. And
well, so they're certainly treating this one like it is. Almost to the point where they're throwing it. I hate to say that because I don't really think it's that bad, but honest to God, some of it I just despair of.
Well, that would explain why they're trying their narrative instead of their case.
Yeah,
they don't expect to win, and so they aren't banking on winning. They're banking on getting banking on getting as much evidence in the public record as they conceivably can get, which that goes along with the defense is going to call Eric Lichtblau. Well, let's talk about all the people we want to ask Eric Lichtblau who he talked to and what they said.
Right.
That's more. That's why they're really just so far out to the margins on relevance.
Yeah.
Under 403 on some of this stuff. It's like, it raises like, why are you doing this? You've got to have an
What does
ulterior
that have to
motive.
do with this? Right, I know.
Is there a possibility that this case is being used just to get all these FBI agents and the FBI narrative on the record so they can be exposed in later cases? I mean, it sounds like that's way, like in the weeds and everything, but is that even a possibility?
I think
I
that's
don't see
only a
it. I don't
possibility.
think we're going to see Allison Sands ever again, right? Like that, she's done. We're done with her.
Right. But no, I think that's it serves a function in terms of the report that
Right,
Durham's going to write. This is now public testimony for
right,
purposes of his report.
right.
But
It's
I don't know
sworn
that
under oath.
it's not
Right.
a foundation for later prosecutions of people in the FBI. That, I think that ship has largely sailed by statute of limitations grounds. But I don't think, from early on, Durham ever really thought those were prosecutable claims because, again, we always got to circle back to the question. I know a lot of people disagree at this, but the FBI rank and file, by and large, was doing their job. They may have been doing it badly. They may have been biased in their approach. But on a day-to-day basis, they were largely simply doing their job. And you're not going to prosecute them for crimes for that.
Yeah, so, I was thinking, like when you testify before a grand jury, you basically lock in your position and you lock in the history of what you claim happened, and I kind of see like this case could potentially be locking in the FBI into what they did, what happened, all this stuff surrounding that. In these later cases, they could come around and expose, and just use it
But
to blow
most
up.
of these witnesses don't look to me like they have much to do with that, with the possible exception of Price Step.
Right. And he sounded like he knew exactly how to be useless on the witness stand.
Yeah, that sounded an awful lot like "fuck you" testimony to me today.
I would say if Durham has any thought in his head that, well, this is a throwaway case, politically, that could be a disaster because at some point the attorney general could step in and say, all right, you lost a simple false statements case. You made a mockery of the FBI. This whole thing is a mess. I'm shutting you down. And any thought of a conspiracy case goes out the window.
Yeah, and if I was Durham, I'd say it's because an FBI agent, the FBI general counsel, withheld evidence from me. And it's like the evidence that would have made the case.
Sure, tell your story walking though, Durham, because you're done. You file your report, and we'll do what we want with it.
But even in terms of the presentation, like, okay, Bill. So let's say the whole thing with why they were keeping the source away from the agents. Why didn't they explain that before they put Hellman on the witness stand last week? Because he was only the second witness, and the defense was hammering him with questions about that. It makes it sound like there's something really nefarious going on. Why wouldn't Durham's team have explained what that was first?
Yeah, no, that was terrible.
It was awful.
As was the whole narrative that was basically presented in the first 5 minutes of opening statements. Our FBI was duped. They were the victims. You don't do that if you have all these instances following up from then in the past few days where the FBI was, well, they weren't duped in the most charitable view.
The better argument would have been that they tried to dupe them, but we didn't fall for it. That might have worked.
Exactly right. So the whole FBI was duped was not a good starting point because we found out since that no, they weren't duped. The most charitable view is that there were a couple of idiots in the FBI, but there were also really a bunch of bad apples there. So it doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. To be honest, I put it down to just, poor resources, not enough people didn't think it through. I wish I could say, oh, this is some 48D chess move, but I don't see it.
No, I don't think so either. But I am just astonished that sort of the level of the quality of the work is less than it should be, regardless of whether you think you're getting convicted or not. And the DC jury, that's a problem. The jury voir dire showed that really clearly, right? Cooper wasn't giving them anything, which he should have. He should have struck a number of those witnesses for cause, right? He had more people in the veneer. He could have kept going, but so there's a lot of problems with trying this kind of case in that courthouse. But still, there's no excuse for some of the things that they're doing that it's just obvious under preparation.
Well, in particular, because as someone else just said, what's going to happen if and when this guy gets acquitted? It's like, okay, you got to shut it down. And in everything else we just talked about and all these other revelations, they just kind of, they go away. And we're never going to hear about it again.
Right. Now, of course, if the case against Danchenko goes well, I think we all agree that's the more important case anyway. Then, maybe that counterbalances it. And they will have a way easier time in the EDVA.
True, but Danchenko is such a slam dunk for all these establishment people because remember, he is the Russian agent. Yeah, we were duped by the Russians. It was all Russian disinformation.
I know. Well, in terms of whether there'll be another prosecution, one thing that got my attention in this case, if you guys follow me on Twitter, maybe you saw it, was, if they turned over Jenks material for Steele and had him on their witness list, then he clearly can't be part of a conspiracy that they either already have indicted or they're planning to. So I don't know what that says about whether there's anything else coming. I don't have any inside scoop on that, I will say.
I had a similar reaction when Elias took the stand so willingly and answered every question. It's like, well, that means he's not getting charged anywhere.
Right, and he knows it. Yeah.
Why couldn't they just go after? I mean, this is small potatoes, but Jaffe and Sussman were apparently engaged in a conspiracy. At least it would have been something more than this, single false statement charge, unless they just didn't have the goods on it.
Sounds like they might still charge Jaffe for major fraud under 1030, because I think they are good and pissed that he used all of that, what should have been, it's not classified, but what it should have been non-public information that wasn't to be used for the things he was doing with it. So I won't be surprised if they do charge him. And then whether Sussman is involved in that, but unlikely. But that's the one thing that looks to me that is likely. And I'm not even sure of that.
Well, something that did come out, I think, in this was just an aside, in the conversation about Leakplow before it all started this morning, there was a reference to the Fusion GPS people having invoked the Fifth.
Right.
And so they've never been immunized. They've invoked the Fifth. I think, I still think they're probably a target along with Joffrey.
Right. It seems that way, doesn't it? So
yeah, because they're mysteriously absent. They're certainly not going to testify for either side, and I'm sure that's because they've all invoked the Fifth, and Durham is not anxious to give any of them. And that specifically goes to that meeting that he gave Laura Segow
right.
Immunity over, which had Sussman, Elias, Segow, Frisch, and Simpson, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
What do the prosecutors do if they charge Jaffe? What do they do with the FBI monkey business about turning him into two different unconnected sources?
You mean like through this stuff that happened today, where it seems like he's he's sort of the source for the Chicago office and the DC?
That's it. Yes.
Philly office.
Yes, he's a CHS.
Right.
Yeah, commenting
but somehow
on
he's also the anonymous
on
source.
his stuff.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, it's a mess. It's just a mess. And it'll give whoever his lawyers are. Is it Steve Tyrell, his lawyer? Yes. More stuff to throw up and be like, yeah, well, they can't even shoot straight, these cops. So how are you listening to their testimony and believing this nonsense? But on the other hand, people can, unlike a 1001 case where people can identify with the defendant because they think to themselves, shit, I might have said stuff to an agent if I were talking to him too. Of course, Baker's not an agent, but just in general, 1001s I think are hard. But, misusing information that you only have access to because you're kind of a government contractor, that tends to piss people off a little more. So maybe they'll cut the Bureau some more slack than they're going to in a 1001. But I agree with you. It's definitely a problem. It's a problem the way the Bureau handled it.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump off here. I've been on for a couple hours now, but
I
did
have
want
to go too. It's good
did
talking
want
to
to
you guys.
say that I got a win this morning. Got Judge Boasberg to release a defendant, a January 6th defendant named Brian Mock, who's been in custody for 11 months. Turned that around today, and let me give you just a quick example of what I found there. This is a sort of underscores what we're talking about here. The FBI agent in that case interviewed one of the Capitol police officers, and in her 302 in mid-May 2021, she wrote that the Capitol police officer injured his elbow when he was struck during the melee and caused excruciating pain. That's in the 302 of her interview. And she showed him the video of the episode that my client's charged with. A month later, in the complaint affidavit that she filed to get my client arrested and has been the basis for holding him in jail, she wrote that the officer struck his elbow on the ground, causing him excruciating pain as a result of my client pushing him down. A month between the 302, which says he was struck by a blow during the melee, and then later she says it was when his elbow hit the ground. No explanation for that change. That's the FBI.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Kept him in jail. That's the allegation that the officer was injured by my client's conduct.
Which was
and
what
kept
the
him in
judge,
jail.
Yeah, right.
You've been doing amazing work on that, Ship, and I've been following it a little bit, and it's just amazing what you've been able to do. And I was fortunate enough to catch a conference call of you at work there a couple of months ago, and that was just brilliant thing to watch. And I understand there's a January 6th legal fund that can support the work that you're doing and providing the legal funds for that defense, right?
Yeah. None of my clients can, independently fund their own defense, so they are paying what they can pay, and we're using fundraising efforts both by the clients and a national, legal defense fund. You can find it on my Twitter site or over on Truth. I got verified on Truth Social, and the site's just gone crazy. I went from 1,000 followers to 9,000 followers in a day. Then Cash Patel re-truth something that I posted, and he's got 600,000 followers, and that went crazy. So I'm not going to pitch the fund here, but if anybody wants to go look for it, they can find it on my profile page on either one.
The link is up in the nest for anybody interested.
Yeah, and for anybody who doesn't know, Bill's doing good work there. Marina Medvin is doing really good work for those folks. I didn't take any of those cases because I'm writing about them for Red State, and also because I'm tied up with Carter's case and some other things. But
which is also an important thing.
Marina and Bill are doing really good work for those guys.
Yeah, I every month I make an effort to drag Leslie into one or more of my cases, and sooner or later she's going to say yes.
Right. Yeah. So behind the scenes, I will say I'm offering commentary. Let's say, but my name's not on any of those pleadings. So, but Bill is doing a great job. So.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
See you next time. Bye, guys.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Let's see here. So if anybody else wants to speak, go ahead and request. FOIA fan, Walk of Fire, I see you guys are hanging out here. I don't know if you have anything you want to share. Otherwise, I might take a few questions here. Oops. Sorry, guys. I'm all over the place here.
I got something.
Okay.
This goes back to last Friday. Something struck me, kind of made me smile. We've talked badly about the job that Durham and his lawyers have, or his legal team has done in court. But there was one episode Friday that they should be proud of. I think this was what's the guy's name? Al Gore.
Al Gore, yeah.
Al Gore took took the CIA witnesses on examination, and he got. Let me step back. By way of background, there's always a concern when you put on evidence like they have of these largely irrelevant pieces of data, supposedly representing evidence of nefarious contacts between Trump and Russia. The veracity, the reliability of that data the judge has held is not an issue in the case. And he doesn't want to hear much of it, if any. And so the concern for the prosecution is that the jury will hear snippets of it and come away thinking that the FBI had in its hand a nuclear bomb relating to Trump, and they either mishandled it or buried it, did something really bad, and Sussman's not to blame. It's the FBI. Part of that evidence went to the CIA in February 2017, and it consisted largely of Yodaphone data, Russian cell phone data, supposedly collected via DNS lookups as having originated in or around Trump Tower, in or around the executive office complex, including the White House, when Trump was there. So somebody, the suspicion is that somebody connected with Trump was calling home to Russia everywhere he went. And that's how Sussman kind of pitched it when he took it to the FBI. And it was clear that the judge wasn't going to hear any evidence as to whether that theory was right or wrong. It's the theory that was presented, and we're not going to be trying that theory. Mr. Al Gore did a tap dance. I don't know if anybody saw the movie Chicago with Richard Gere. There's a scene, he plays the Chicago sleazy lawyer defending a murder case. And there's a scene where he cross-examines key witness, and interspersed in his cross-examination, he does a tap dance. So he taps a little, asks a pointed question, taps some more. That's what Al Gore did, because he got that CIA guy to testify that, oh yeah, they brought this data to me about Alpha Bank. And that's all he did to describe what Sussman brought him. He didn't mention Yodaphones. He didn't mention new data. He didn't mention exactly what it was. But he did say Sussman told him that it's not what he brought to the FBI. It maybe, kind of similar, but not really related. But it had to do with Alpha Bank. You read his testimony, and I did, and you come away with the impression, and I'm sure the jury was left with this impression, that Sussman lied to the CIA guy about having brought the same information to the FBI. It sounded like it was identical when we know it really wasn't. But Al Gore kind of did a little tap dance, got that in that fashion, and the defense didn't correct it. Didn't do anything to say, wait a minute, there was some more stuff that he couldn't have brought to the FBI because it didn't match up time wise. So the record is there. It sounds like Sussman flat out lied 100% as to having brought it to the FBI before. So I thought, oh, at least they see the issues and did what they could to avoid raising new issues that they can't deal with, like the Yoda phone. I don't know what they'd have done if they'd have drugged that into the courtroom. Okay, that's all I have.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point, and as you kind of raised, I mean I think Durham's actually been able to do that a couple times where, in the pretrial motions it looked like Durham wasn't really going to be able to attack the veracity of the data itself, but then we saw last week Hellman get up there and he's like, no, I debunked this within a day, like this data is totally garbage. So I think they are able to translate that into the jury. I mean, through witness testimony, they're able to introduce suspicion on the data itself, which obviously really changes the narrative, right? I mean, did Sussman bring fake data or was it real data? Well, we don't know what Sussman knew. We don't know his state of mind, but I mean, it certainly sounds worse when the data's fake and it's so easily debunked. It does change, I think, the perception, at least in the jurors' minds. I would hope.
No, I think that's right. I think one point that we haven't mentioned so far is that Durham is clearly underfunded. He's clearly undermanned. Compare what happens with Durham and with what happened with Mueller, right? He's like, Durham his funding is about 10% or less, 5% or something like that of what Mueller got, or Mueller, whatever his name is. And it shows. It just shows, you cannot run these kinds of trials against opponents who are funded better. And obviously Sussman is for, the reasons that we know. So that kind of shows you that's a real problem. And the question is, why hasn't Durham flagged it out? Why didn't Barr fund him properly? Why didn't Barr ensure that this was going to be okay? Now we're still waiting for listeners who remember about Technofog, right? He was still going to do a story on what's going on there in the background at DOJ, and I know a bit about it too, and we're waiting for that story to come through. It's a problem. You cannot go against the machine, the Clinton machine, the Democratic machine. You cannot go against these people if you're underfunded and if you're understaffed, and that's clearly what we have here with Durham. I don't have the answer. I don't know what the grander plan is or whatever. I can just say for sure that that's the case. That's what we're looking at. And I wish it wasn't the case, but that is what it is. If you look at his half-year funding sort of bills that he submits to DOJ, it's like 1 million, 2 million, or whatever. If you look at Mueller, it was 42 million. Huge difference. Remember how Trump always talked about the 17 Democratic high-powered lawyers? Well, that was an understatement. There were more. And with Durham, we're talking about 3, 4. The guy that King just talked about, Al Gore, right? he's actually moonlighting. He's doing another case somewhere else. So these are massive problems, and I wish I could say there was some big scheme, there was some big plan, there was some idea behind that, why this is the case, and this is all thought through or whatever. But unfortunately, I can't say that. I don't think it is. I think it's just not enough money, not enough people.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I always bring up this point when you raise that. I mean, that's up to Durham. I mean, if Durham needs more money, if he needs more staff, he has to ask for it. And you know what? If he gets political pushback, that's when he just has to issue a simple press release and just say, hey, my investigation continues. Maybe even do like an interim report, but regardless, like issue like, hey, I'm continuing this investigation due to political interference. I cannot predict the timeline or whatever. Like even a simple statement like that would just blow up in the media, and that's it. Like you can get all the money you want, but like I don't want to hear excuses once this is all over. If he misses statutes of limitations, or if he misses crimes that you and I and everybody else can easily identify, which is my biggest fear, and then we have to ask him like, hey, why didn't you prosecute this? And he says, well, it's statute of limitations or resources or anything like that. Like that is completely unacceptable. Like that is going to be worse for this country than him just cutting and running right now and not even doing a report. I mean, I would rather I would being facetious here, like I would rather the truth be out there, but honestly, like I don't want the truth to be out there and then have the groundswell of anger out there with nowhere to really place it. I mean, I don't know what you're going to be able to tell people. Maybe it's 40% of the country that's Republicans. There's going to be a lot of anger out there if these people get off scot-free and then we get this long report and then we can go through and find all these crimes. So I don't know what Durham's plans are, but I hope there's more. I hope it's not just Joffe either. I mean, I hope he really, goes to the heart of this. And you know what? If he has to bring a case that's a little bit weak, I'd rather him try it. Like, try it in the D.C. court. If you can't get the conspiracy charge through, I understand. It's tough. They had years to cover up evidence. I understand. It's going to be incredibly challenging for him to bring that case, but I hope he does it. I mean, I want to see all the evidence that he's got. Bring it to trial, present the best and strongest case that you can. And if he loses in a D.C. court, I will know that he did the best he could.
A big
But
part
in
of
many
the
cases,
reason for these
in
problems.
many cases, it's too late. Remember the March 6th meeting, right? March 6th, 2017, when the FBI met the DOJ and they lied their asses off. McCabe, Strzok, Priestap, nothing happened. 5 years have passed. And what happened is that Durham gave those notes of that meeting to Sussman's team. And it wasn't Durham who introduced it at the trial. It was Sussman's team who introduced it. That's the sort of the whole, everything's upside down to me, ever since this trial started. It's Sussman who is kind of indicting the FBI, and it's Durham who's kind of portraying the FBI as some kind of victim. And it's totally upside down. I completely agree with you. It would have been much better to start off by saying the FBI is corrupt, the FBI did terrible things, but Sussman did also lie to the FBI. Two things can be true at the same time. But by turning it all around, by making the FBI the victim, it gives Sussman's team this opportunity to paint the FBI as corrupt, which is very weird because again that's Team Clinton. But at the same time, so far it's been pretty effective. I would have, for the long run, I would have much preferred it to be the other way around.
I would cut Durham a little bit of slack, just in the sense that he only works with people that he trusts, obviously, and his office doesn't leak. Now, if he went and stalked, DOJ prosecutors, FBI investigators, every move he made would be on the cover of the Washington Post and the New York Times, and his the special counsel's office would just fall apart. He can't operate in those conditions with leaks coming left and right. And I think that was absolutely going to happen if he just had a bunch of random suits from those organizations. They're too politicized. So he really was on the horns of a dilemma. I don't know what he could have done.
That's kind of the root of the problem is that Durham doesn't have the benefit of a media that he can use as a tool like Mueller had. And, so many of these problems, the funding deficiencies, the staffing deficiencies, just all of this stuff gets solved by a media that's not completely in the tank for one party. And unfortunately, that's the reality that we live in. And that's the reality that Durham has to prosecute this case under. So it's, I don't know, have we reached the point where that's an insurmountable obstacle to holding government accountable? I don't know. But it's just, I don't know. Democracy dies in darkness. I'll just say that.
I think that's a fair point. I mean, if the media was presenting this in thorough detail, and if even 30 or 40% of the country knew what we know, I mean, this would be the number one political story because of the groundswell of demand from the public for it. I mean, CNN and all these networks couldn't skate by. I mean, I saw Elon Musk tweet out criticism of ABC, rightfully so, because they've completely ignored this trial. But you know what? If there was, 40 million Americans calling for it, they wouldn't be able to ignore it. And once you get into the minutia of what actually happened, that's where you understand how bad it is. And if networks did break this down in such a detail, yeah, it would serve Durham to a large extent because it would build the pressure on some of these people that are still holding the line and withholding documents and sticking to the plan, I guess.
And we wouldn't be here today if the media wasn't complicit in all of these operations. And in order for the media to fairly report what's happening now, they have to be critical of themselves, and that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, that's not going to happen at all. If I can just kind of jump back to another issue, which I think is really important to talk about today because it affects a lot of us here today on this chat, is Rodney Joffe cited a whole bunch of us in his quest to infer that somehow John Durham exposed Rodney Joffe's identity. And that is absolute bullshit. So I know, I just wanted to bring it up because we haven't talked about that yet. And it affects me because I've been, I was one of the people there. It affects Walk of Fire. It affects Fool, obviously. It affects a whole bunch of us here. So, anyway, I just wanted to bring that in because if anyone's listening, especially on the Durham side, hey, guys, you need to push back because none of us heard anything from Durham's side. We had no leaks. There was nothing whatsoever. None of that has anything to do with Durham. The only reason why Rodney Joffe's name was mentioned in our corner of Twitter is because Fool went through the Alpha Bank docket. And within the Alpha Bank docket, which was a separate case, nothing to do with John Durham, there was a deposition by Daniel Jones, John McCain's little buddy. And Daniel Jones was the one who offered up Rodney Joffe's name. And this all happened before the indictment of Michael Sussman, had nothing to do with John Durham. So I really, really, really hope if you're listening, John Durham's team, please push back on that bullshit.
Completely agree. 100%. I mean, yeah. Nothing to even add to that. I think that's perfect.
And if you're listening, Rodney Joffe and his team, fuck you and your clockmaker scam.
Well, okay then. Yeah, that's good.
Sorry, I had to get that out.
Yeah, fire him up. I mean, that's naming people in court filings will entice them a little bit more. That's good.
Maybe I totally missed it, but why do we have this Joffe filing that names all these tweets that appears to be a completely separate case? What did this come from?
Yeah, so it was like a couple months ago now. He filed a motion to intervene in the Sussman case because basically Durham had maligned him in all these filings for months and months. And as a result of everything that happened, he was like under a bunch of pressure. So Judge Cooper kicked that to a separate docket under like a sealed, and they had some sealed filings. And then he ruled a couple weeks ago that they were going to be unsealed, subject to some redactions. So that's what came out tonight. So, so we saw the filing from Joffe basically saying, a bunch of people on Twitter are being mean to him. And he has like 46 pages of mean tweets. that are directed at him, I guess. So
I'm a little bit confused why public tweets or public media articles would be redacted in a filing like that. Is there any obvious reasons that I'm completely missing?
I'm not sure.
The tweets he selected were the tweets that he attached were selective because he left out the grandfather clock scam.
Yeah, he sure did, didn't he? He was very carefully selecting those. He anything that actually called him out on like stuff he did wrong mysteriously are not included in his filing. Yeah, that's a good point, King. Um, anybody else want to speak? I know we have a bunch of people that requested a chance to ask questions, but Walk of Fire, we haven't heard from you tonight. What's up, man?
Oh, not much. I'm actually doing a lot of chores and stuff around the house. I'm mostly just on listen mode, but wanted to pop in real quick because just everything that's been going on the last week or two with the trial, and even before, I know I've missed a lot of these. But I wanted to make sure that I gave you a shout out. Your live tweeting today was amazing. I mean, it was very clear, concise, easy to follow. I know your fingers were hurting by the end. I'm sure you took all sorts of great notes and everything. I'm a couple days behind on the transcripts from last week, trying to get caught up on everything, but I feel like I don't even need to read the ones from today almost because of how well you did. So I wanted to make sure that you got recognition for that.
That's very nice of you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I hope you're enjoying DC. It's pretty swampy, but pretty fun as well. So don't get sucked in too much. At least not until we all run for Congress, and then we can take it by storm.
There you go.
I take that back. I mean, in a purely non-insurrection-y way, we will take it by storm. But overall, I don't think I have too much to contribute that anyone else hasn't already said tonight. It's interesting to watch all this go down. I think we're learning a lot. I think, I figured we would learn some stuff from the trial that we didn't see in the filings before. But man, we're getting all sorts of fun stuff. So that's neat, especially for those of us that like digging into the nitty gritty. When it comes to Durham as a whole, Steve McIntyre has been real big on the whole. The focus on the criminal side is letting them get away with just the counterintelligence failures and narrative side, and I think I agree with him a lot on that. Of a lot of all this stuff that went down is unfortunately just dirty political tricks. That's how it works. It's the nature of the beast. Even the FBI, the federal government, all of the DOJ, it's all just people. And you have your policies and procedures, and those can be followed to the letter, or how did Obama put it in his last meeting in the Oval Office of doing it by the book. You can do it by the book and still be corrupt and crooked and biased without technically crossing a criminal line. So while we're getting some of these indictments, that's great. I hope we get some more. But I think sunlight's the best disinfectant. I think, unfortunately, the political process is going to be the best way to clear house and get this all out there to the public. It's certainly loading us up with plenty of ammunition for 2022, for 2024, for calling people out and saying, hey, no, you can't vote for them because they were part of these dirty tricks. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Another big thing that I'm excited about, I guess, is part of this whole indictment with Sussman is that Durham was declassifying thousands and thousands of documents in order to turn over to him. We may not see those in the trial. We may not see them for a long time, but it gives us plenty of things to FOIA and go after for the next several years, I'm sure. And they're going to try and redact as much as they can. And so we will do our best to figure out what's under those redactions. But let's the problem with politics is that it's never done. The job is always ongoing. We're not going to reach a finish line ever. Even when Durham is done, we're never going to reach a finish line. And it's just constantly calling them out, being on top of things as much as we can. There's my speech for the night, I guess. I might pop in to speak a little bit later too, but I'm going to just be on listen mode for a while I finish up some stuff around here. Again, I appreciate your thread today. I appreciate you hosting the spaces. And if anyone has any questions or comments for me, feel free to DM me. I'd have closed DMs, but I try and check my message requests whenever I can, which isn't very often these days, but hopefully that'll be changing soon. So thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you, Walkfire. I mean, your comments are great, as they always are, and we're always lucky to have you stop in our chat whenever you can and share your thoughts. I mean, I think that's a great point that you raised. I mean, we're seeing all these documents declassified, and it might be a lot easier to get them through FOIA now, so, or at least in theory. So that might be something to look forward to as we try to get the answers to all this.
I will say real quick on that front, one thing that they like to do, I just got a FOIA request back, and they withheld the entire case file because of the B7A exemption, which is law enforcement proceedings, which I think is ridiculous, and thinking about appealing that. But that's why I've held off on FOIA-ing anything from the Sussman trial or Danchenko or anything. Is we need to wait until it's over, then FOIA, so that they can't use that B7A, or at least not as liberally as they would like.
That's a good point, and that might be something to think about. I mean, I think all of us were thinking earlier about the Grasso-Joffe 302, and that's probably going to be subject to that exemption, with Joffe potentially being under criminal investigation still. Let's see here. Sorry, I appreciate you guys that have been waiting so long to ask your questions or offer your comments. I wanted to kind of hear from a few people, but Christopher, I just added you as speaker. I don't know if you have a question or comment. Go ahead, man. That's what happens. I finally give people their shot, and it's been so long that you probably are off doing something. Christopher, if you're there, go ahead with your thoughts. All righty. Sorry, Christopher. Yeah. We'll come back to you though.
Yeah.
Hey, Will, what's up?
So I think Walkfire just kind of answered his own question of why this is dragging out is the exact, they're burying stuff. Durham. I mean, to me, it's pretty obvious that this is not going anywhere. They're soft pedaling it. I think Durham's not trying to make the FBI the bad guy, because, like you said, it's the defense is going to do that, and Durham's not going to be able to get any kind of cooperation from anybody if he tries to drag the FBI into the courtroom and lambaste them. Obviously, Pianka was dragging his feet, but I think the whole thing with Chicago is it goes to Rahm Emanuel and Evanina, and how the White House was running it. So who's Obama going to kick it to? He's going to kick it to his buddy. He's going to kick it to Rahm Emanuel in Chicago, to find something, since there's nothing going on. And then I was also going to comment on the fact that Clinton had her eye on McCabe. She hated, she hates Comey, and Strzok and Page were hitching their wagon to Andy to propel them into those spots. And nobody liked Comey. I think he was pretty universally hated in DC because of the simple fact that he's just trying to keep the job for himself, and he didn't really care. He preferred Trump to win because then he could just play Trump's bagpipe to do the Bill Barr thing. But Andy was definitely hoping to get Clinton in there because there's a job waiting for him. So, but yeah, I think he did a great job today. It was fascinating. It was just you get to see what that place is like. It's just it's awful. It really is. But and kudos to where'd she go? Where'd she go? Did she leave?
Leslie.
Yeah. Oh, there she is. Yeah. But
yeah, I appreciate that, and I think he had a couple good thoughts there. I'm not so sure that they would have kicked it to Chicago for anything related to Rahm Emanuel, but otherwise, I mean, yeah, I think he had a couple good points there. I don't see Rahm Emanuel really being involved there or being the nexus that would connect it. But
yeah, I mean, he's a pit bull. I mean, he tears into anybody. He's got a history of just tearing into anybody who he'll make stuff happen. But they're basically just trying to get something to happen, and nothing is happening. And there's the White House, I guess, is screaming at the FBI and to get something done, and nobody's getting anything done. So they kicked it to Allison, and she's hopefully going to open up anything. But I don't know. They're just it wasn't going anywhere. And
Well, I'll pop in real quick about the Chicago aspect. Chicago, their field office has a very big emphasis on the counterintelligence cyber side. So you'll see
Evanina,
them
right?
Do that, Evanina, and then also a lot of people, either don't realize or forget Curtis Heide. Actually, he was the one that was overseeing Allison Sands and involved in a lot of this. And I was telling someone earlier today, for some reason, I don't remember why I was thinking it. I was thinking that he was not necessarily a bad actor, but I don't remember why I thought that. So I don't know. But he was actually involved in the mid-year exam case, and then also on the Mueller team for a while. He even signed some of the search warrants for Roger Stone stuff. I was thinking about that.
Wasn't he considered a director at one point?
A director?
Yeah, wasn't Evanina considered for the job as director?
He was the director of the
Chicago.
No. It's the why am I forgetting it?
Counter intel thing.
It's some cyber task force something.
Oh, okay.
I can't recall exactly.
I tried to follow a link to the Chicago Tribune. It was dead.
You did what?
I tried to follow a link to the Chicago Tribune, and the link was dead. From Bullshitico.
Yeah, no, he was involved in, especially during the transition and stuff. You'll see his name pop up. I can't remember what exactly task force or maybe it was under the ODNI or something like that. But he was kind of the liaison between all the different intelligence agencies on cyber matters.
Okay.
But then, yeah, Curtis Heide, he was on Mueller's team. He was part of this Alpha Bank stuff. He was part of mid-year exam. So he's pretty involved. Someone was mentioning earlier, how did Mueller not know about this? How did he not find out about this?
Oh.
Well, I mean, one of the agents on his team was part of this, and I think, I looked at that as, they didn't look at it because they all knew there was nothing there and there was no point in looking at it, or it had already been pretty much closed. But I wanted to point that out, that the Chicago thing I don't think necessarily has to do with Chicago politics as much as just, you've got San Francisco Pittsburgh and Chicago field offices are really big on the cyber matter. So if you see a cyber case, it's almost always going to be out of one of those three, maybe Washington field office and maybe headquarters, but usually it's going to be those three.
Okay. Well, cool. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Christopher, I don't know if you're there, but wanted to give you another shot. No? Okay. Let's see. General Logos, what's up?
Hey, thanks for having me. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, great. I just want to say thank you first for live tweeting the courtroom today. That was nice. So I kind of have a two-part question here, and it has to do with the operation itself. I mean, the sheer size of this operation. I mean, everything from laundering information through Yahoo to the FISA court, to I'm sure you guys remember the Office of Net Assessments, to Orr and the ham radio, to the professor. I think his name was Mifsud. Who do we think, and this is a question to all the chat leaders that we have, who do we think was the architect of this operation? I mean, this is something where I feel it would need to be managed. I mean, I know that they, fed information to certain outlets that they knew would be friendly to their allegations, but somebody had to be running point on it. Somebody had to be kind of briefing it, bird dogging it as a term. And what do you think their primary method of communication was to basically make sure the op was running as smoothly? I mean, it really. I mean this in. I mean, I don't mean this in a good way, I guess, but you have to almost kind of step back in amazement and awe of what they were able to kind of pull off. I mean, I don't think the person that architected it is too dumb. I think they're extremely smart and intelligent and understood exactly how this could be done. I mean, I have a personal feeling that Brennan may have been a part of it in some form of the architecture of it, but just kind of curious what you guys think of who really was the architect and what was their primary method of communication. I mean, we think of the smoky back room, but I would assume that they weren't using normal channels of communication that would be easily traced back or documented or logged. And I'll stand by for an answer. But thank you.
Yeah, so a few points to make. So I think you referenced Mifsud, and that particular piece has kind of been debunked. I mean, I don't think there's any merit there. But towards your central question of like who was orchestrating this and how did they communicate? I mean, I don't know that any of us have a real good sense of the command and control structure because it's so hard to infer what is sheer incompetence and what is malfeasance. And until we actually see the communications, we're just not going to know. I mean, obviously today we have a lot of indications that furthering a long line of other pieces that we've gotten that the FBI leadership did some highly suspicious things, and some of the decisions they made would seem to suggest a criminal intent potentially, but until we actually see communications or we see a witness come forward and say this is what somebody directed me to do, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if there will be a prosecution that identifies anybody like that. And I mean, as far as their means of communication, so far, I mean, they're putting a lot of stuff in damning emails and link chats, which is their internal communication system. So, yeah, maybe there's a secondary system. I mean, you look at like the private actors, and I know like Fusion GPS and I think Orbis as well. Like they did a massive upgrade of their IT capabilities, and this was actually a thread that Undercover Huber put together years ago. and basically they almost have like a bank grade IT infrastructure, basically to guard their communication systems. So yeah, I don't know how many safeguards there are. Maybe there's like a signal chat out there that they use to communicate. I know there's been a lot of speculation about the ham radios. I don't know that there's any merit there. It is pretty unusual to have like Nellie Orr, Sasha Appelman, and a few others that actually have ham radio licenses. That's a very odd concentration of people to have an interest like that. But so far we don't know, and until Durham gets a witness that says, yeah, we all communicated on ham radio. Can you imagine that? I would imagine there's an encrypted channel of some kind if there is a control structure to this. So, and be your walk of fire. Go ahead and chime in.
Well, and I would say too that for a lot of this, kind of what I was saying before, is this is business as usual. This is politics. You still need a little bit of command and control structure, but a lot of it is just like that declassified memo from Ratcliffe. Hey, let's tie Trump to Russia to distract from my server. Okay, everyone kind of plays their part, not with necessarily even criminal intent, like wah ha 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 ha. Just okay. What do we need to do? One of Joffy's emails. We're just looking for something that can support not investigation, a deeper look, or something like that. Like that's all they need. Okay, what do we find? What can we find? And so maybe you've got someone that's causing these pings, maybe not. But hey, all we need is something that we can get the FBI to start looking at him for. And then the FBI starts looking at him, and you get a leak, and then there we go. Trump's been spending months saying we can't elect someone who's under FBI investigation, and then Hillary gets exonerated, and then for her October surprise, she can turn around and say, "Oh, look, you're under FBI investigation. Remember what you said? We can't elect someone that's under FBI investigation." So, bam. I mean, it's simple, and then all the details flow from that organically. You don't need someone pulling every string every day that's keeping 30 different players all in line. It's just the way it's going to go. These people they get paid to spend 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week learning how to manipulate politics and the press and the public and all of that. For them, that's all they're doing is, okay, if this comes out, how do we spin it and kick that out there, and then let just DC politics work. And so a lot of this, as you dig into the details and you want to bring it to one massive conspiracy that was planned from the beginning, we're never going to find something like that. It's picking apart, okay, what were the plans and what was just organically picked up on and run with it.
Yeah, it's kind of like, when you have an institution that's filled with a bunch of people, that I think we're pretty convinced that pretty much the entire FBI or anybody in management was rooting for Hillary Clinton. Whenever any of them was faced with a situation where they had to make a decision, and perhaps they could pick either decision A or decision B, and either one was ethically or morally responsible, but one benefited Hillary Clinton and one benefited Donald Trump, they always ended up taking the choice that benefited their preferred candidate. And that's sort of how institutional bias rears its ugly head. It's not necessarily that everything's being directed or centrally controlled. It's just bias influences the entire direction of an entire institution, and it just works its way through that way, and it's, I don't know how to solve that problem. I have no idea how to solve that problem.
Right. There's that text exchange between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok where she says he's not ever going to become president, right? And he says, no, we'll stop it. And everyone wants to focus on Strzok's text saying, no, we'll stop it. And say, oh, there we go. But I think the actual more damning text is her and realizing what her mindset is every day when she goes to work is, oh my gosh, this monster is going to be president. We can't let that happen. Not that she's going to cross a legal line to stop him, but just if information comes in that's bad about Hillary versus information that comes in that's bad about Trump, which one is she going to believe? And therefore that's going to influence, not direct, not be an excuse, but just influence her decision making. That's where I think the institutional rot, I guess you can say, or just institutional bias comes into play. Is everyone ran with this narrative that Trump is a Russian Manchurian candidate, and so okay, how do we stop that from happening? Not because we hate him or because he's a Republican. It's, oh, these damn Russians. How do we stop the Russians? And it just clouded them so much, and everything happens at such a breakneck speed, especially during an election year. You can see all these same different events happening on the same dates and think that, oh my gosh, they've got to be connected. But taking a bigger step back and realizing there's so many other events happening that same day that we don't realize, and that there's just a limited window that we look at and think, oh, this is all they're focusing on all day. Well, no, they were focusing on all sorts of things all day. And we get to see all these different pieces coming in, and we want to connect them for it to make sense in our head. But it was, a lot of it is actually coincidence, or maybe they're connected in some tangential way. But it's the bias itself that says, okay, you didn't make an illegal decision here. And that goes back to the criminal versus just counterintelligence failure. You may not have done something illegal, but look at how all the investigations, all the focus was on Trump and Russia. And then you can say, okay, from the going back to the who's in control, you don't have to do much other than just say, I know how they're going to react. Let me just drop a little crumb here and a little crumb there and a little crumb there, and then watch the mice run around and play with it. Boom. You've got it all set.
It also exposes something at the FBI, and I can't remember what exactly it was that triggered this, but there was at some point that I realized that the FBI must be a terrible place to work, particularly if you're working anywhere near the 7th floor. But what it seems to be is that if you want to advance through the levels of the FBI, your only option is to be a political player and to play ball. And it's just it has nothing to do with professional responsibility. It has nothing to do with competence. All it has to do is be able to take directions and follow them out, whether you agree with them or not. And there's something very wrong there, because they seem to have a culture that makes it a agency crime to speak up if you disagree.
Yeah, I was going to echo exactly what Walkafire said, that organic was the word that came to my mind, that the FBI or the FBI DOJ had a track. The Clintons obviously had a track, and yeah, there was crossover, but I don't know that they were ever somebody sitting down in a room going, okay, Peter Strzok, here's what you're going to do to extend this thing. I think there were circles, and they were largely based on self-interest, and it really can't be overstated how much that Trump as president threatened the interests of all these different organizations and the people in them, and the people that spent their lives, trying to climb that ladder that JH was just talking about. And if you could look at just a simple thing like the FISA process, that we were told over and over again that no, you can't abuse it. It's impossible. There's these Woods files and 10 different people have to sign off on it and blah, blah, blah. And we find out that, that's bullshit. It was all, it's all rubber stamped. It's all, basically they'll just pass whatever gets put in front of the court. And it took a long time for us to figure that out, and bipartisan opposition to letting that come to light. And that's just one little thing that we discovered because of the kind of the tsunami that Trump brought to bear. And that must have just scared the hell out of a ton of people. And it was making their lives more difficult. So anything that people like Strzok or McCabe that could do to make Trump's life more difficult, they do it, just exactly like that. Little decision of the day. Should we investigate something Clinton did or something that Trump did? We're going to go after Trump.
Yeah, it came to light, that FISA court doesn't even hold a physical hearing when the FBI seeks a FISA warrant. And it's one of those things that sort of like came to light and everybody just pretended that it didn't exist, and I don't know.
That was some serious bullshit too. Hey Ryan, thanks much, man. I appreciate the coverage today and also this. I just wanted to bring up a couple of things, and I apologize if it's been mentioned. I missed about the first 30 minutes or so, getting home late. But Paul Sperry had something, today about, the funding that Hillary may have used being wildly in excess of, what had been reported, to the FC, that prior FEC action, and also that the Obama, recently, came to light, or actually it was a while ago, the Obama campaign, which, for some inconceivable reason to me, actually wound up, sending bucks to Fusion GPS. Anyway, I just wanted to mention those things, which I, kind of bear tangentially on all this. But the thing that I'm looking at right now is, the period in late July 2016 to early August 2016, when all of a sudden everything goes ballistic. And, from the Brennan briefing Obama to everything kicking off, I mean, there's obviously being strings pulled every which way. Those directions have to come from Obama. I think Clapper's on record as saying Obama's like, saying, investigate Russia, Russia interference in the election, devote every resource, to that. And that's really where I want to hear, I want to find some more information out about personally. But anyway, that's all I had. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, you had a few questions or points there. So, as it relates to Paul Sperry's tweet, what he's tweeting out is apparently an allegation from Kash Patel that the amount spent on all these dossier allegations and everything that happened, I think I saw a range of like $50 to $100 million. Now, that seems incredibly high to me. I do suspect there is some level of money laundering. I think they spent considerably more than they reported to the FEC on constructing all of this. But I would not imagine it will come close to $50 million. So, I'm not sure where Paul Sperry actually got that from Kash Patel. I haven't seen that interview, and I'm not sure what Kash Patel was referencing either. So, and then I think you talked a little bit about Obama, and I forgot the second point you made, but I don't know. I don't know how much control or influence Obama had over the allegations or the investigations. It remains to be seen. I don't know. We obviously have the text from Strzok where they say something like the White House is running this, which is pretty intriguing with all the events that we're seeing around that time.
Yeah, the White House is running it, but above and beyond that, even if it's not something that's direct, if he's all of a sudden telling Clapper and all of the IC entities, I want you to investigate Russia interference in this election, that's ostensibly something that's fine on its face. But when you look at the background that he was just informed that Hillary is running a bogus Trump Russia collusion thing, then it takes on a different tone altogether to me.
Can I interrupt?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Brennan, him briefing Obama and I think a couple other people. We don't know the date that he briefed them, right? I think he said on CNN that it was in August.
No, July 28th.
I think he said it on CNN during an interview that it was August.
I believe it is July 28th.
Because there's a scribbly number. I think it's Brennan's. Sorry, I've got like a sore throat. He's got he wrote 26, but it kind of looks like a 28, and I think that's where that's coming from. I've looked pretty hard for this date, and I have not been able to find anyone who's been able to determine it conclusively. It just It's just one of those things.
Well, we have the letter from, I think it was Ratcliffe or maybe it was Grinnell that declassified that memo, and in the memo it says July 28th.
There are very few numbers on there. I think there's 3 separate PDFs, and they're like one's 2 pages, one's 3. I think the other's 3 pages. There's very little information to begin with because almost everything's redacted. But yeah, I don't think there is. I don't know where the number 28 came from. I don't think that's accurate.
I thought I recalled somebody running down like the visitor log or something, or some kind of confirmation on, there actually was a meeting on the 28th, but I just don't remember the details because I never really thought to question that, but certainly worth looking into.
Yeah, I mean, we'll take another look at that. Guys, I think this is probably a good time for me to go ahead and end the chat. I know we have more people that have questions and comments they want to make, but I've had a pretty long day, and
yes, you have. Thank you.
Yeah, I did my best and stuck with it as long as I could, but it's probably a good time for me to catch a few hours of sleep, and we'll see what I do tomorrow. I don't know if I'll live tweet it or not, but I'll consider it, and I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, and I want to thank all of our great speakers, as always. They're always on top of their game, and I hope everybody has a good night.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Good night, everybody.